This story began on a rainy day. It all happened in the Compton Mountains at the Townsend County camp. A subordinate came to the Count. He reported that the rain was hindering reconnaissance. However, there were reports of intermittent lights being observed in the northeast. In the current situation, it seemed highly likely that these were the McCarthy scoundrels. He had been in contact with Adrian von Callisto from the home of Count Callisto. The Count said he understood and would check it himself. So the subordinate should prepare everything for departure. The subordinate agreed. After that, they left the tent together. The guards saw them and began to discuss. It turns out that they had traveled all this way into enemy territory and ended up encountering difficulties. I wonder what is so special about this dragon in its lair. The second guard replied that he was probably trying to win the favor of the Townsend ducal house. Count Callisto has a reputation for being a scoundrel. So thank you, at least for commanding as you should. The main character actually heard all this. He wanted to apologize to them because he wasn't really Count Callisto. His real name was Hans. He had been Adrian von Callisto's personal servant since he was 6 years old. It all started when he did his homework for him. It grew into learning fencing and etiquette, and after the death of the former lord, he took over various matters in the county, including business. And in the end, while his master is busy drinking and chasing women, he runs all the affairs on the estate as Count Callisto's secret representative. Now he has even replaced him during a military campaign. The young man has long since given up jealousy or resentment. Thanks to all this, he has managed to learn a lot, despite being just an amateur. However, this does not mean that he intends to fight in his place. The Count asked if anyone had seen that strange light. The subordinate answered in the affirmative, and wondered if the Count had always been so tall. While she was thinking about this, the hero turned his attention upward. He reflected that at least pretending to be a nobleman was a great stroke of luck. Ordinary soldiers and knights would fight on the front lines, while commanders could remain in the rear and stay safe. He informed his subordinate that visibility was very poor at the moment, so they should return. So they went together. Sometimes the guy wondered if there was such a thing as an afterlife. The escort told his master that he would see him out, and suddenly fell silent. For some reason, his body immediately began to fall, which surprised the Count. Hans was terrified. It seemed like an ambush. His subordinates shouted for him to run away immediately. They rushed toward him to help. But it was too late. Someone had stabbed him in the back. The young man's body immediately fell to the damp, wet ground. Hans was confused. What had happened? Was he really going to die like this? Was his end really so meaningless after all those years spent as someone's replacement? The rain continued to fall, and the only sounds around him were the sounds of battle. The hero was dying and wondered if there was such a thing as an afterlife. He wanted to live, so that he would be the one to receive recognition. He wanted everyone to appreciate his abilities and efforts. He wanted to live for himself, not the way he had lived his previous life. After that, his eyes closed. But suddenly, after a while, he opened them and heard some noise. It turned out that a crying maid was sitting right in front of him, begging her master to forgive her. The guy was confused. Could it be Madeline? But why was she here and not in the county, as she had been before? Moreover, it was strange that she looked so young. The girl continued to beg, saying that she had not meant to disrespect her master, that it would never happen again, and that he should not punish her. Hans still didn't understand why she was belittling him. What strange thing had happened? Soon he saw his hand, and in it was a weapon for beating the maid. To make matters worse, he was no longer on the damp ground, but in a luxurious room. He also turned his head to the side and saw a large mirror. It was clearly his reflection. But why did he look like Count Callisto? In his confusion, the object fell from his hands. In desperation, he immediately rushed toward the maid. But this only frightened her even more. She thought he wanted to hit her, so she covered herself. The guy stopped immediately, realizing that this would only make things worse. Still, he wanted to figure out the situation, so he asked what day it was. Better yet, he wanted to know what year it was. The girl was surprised by the question at first, but then replied that it was the year 853. Hans did not expect to hear this and was extremely shocked. It became clear that he had somehow ended up in the body of the gentleman he had been serving all this time. But that wasn't the only surprising thing. He had also traveled back in time 15 years. For a while, the guy just sat there, thinking that this might be some kind of fantasy. He even hid himself, but felt intense pain. So was everything that was happening really real? These luxurious chambers, he couldn't mistake them for anything else. Now he had soft, delicate hands. They had never even held a pen and knew nothing of work. But first and foremost, he wanted to understand what was happening. Earlier, he had told Madeline that she could leave for now. The girl immediately ran out of the room, bruises visible on her legs, which the gentleman had inflicted on her all this time. Now there is no doubt that this is the infamous scoundrel Count Adrian von Callisto. Now it all ends with him finding someone else to blame. He also uses them as a punching bag to relieve his own irritation. But when he grows up, he will become addicted to drinking and women. After that, he will start causing all sorts of trouble, and he will force Hans to sort it all out. Suddenly he remembered something, so he immediately got up and ran somewhere. It turned out to be a room with lots of bags and boxes. It became clear that everything was different. Now it was a storage room, but it used to be his room. He wouldn't forget the place where he had spent 20 years, of course. Suddenly, one of his subordinates interrupted his thoughts. He was surprised to see his master here. This was the servants' corridor. Hans turned his attention to him. It was Claude, whom he knew. Like Madeline, Claude looked exactly as he remembered him from childhood. They were his colleagues and friends, like family. They had shared their lives on the Count's estate since childhood. Turning to him, the Count asked where Hans was. He was talking about his friend, that is, his servant. Surprised, his companion remarked that he had never heard that name before. If he was new, he could ask the butler about him right away. Adrian shouted that Hans had been working here since he was 6 years old and that he was his age. This made his interlocutor hesitate. The servant clearly could not understand what was going on. This gentleman was behaving very strangely today and talking in the same way. He apologized to the Count and said that as far as he knew, there was no such person here. The main character couldn't believe it. How could this be? Did he really not exist in this world? After a while, the maids were discussing something. In recent days, the children had been seeing the gentleman at dawn. One of them didn't believe it, because he always woke up late in the afternoon. That simply couldn't be. Suddenly, the master himself appeared behind them and addressed them. This frightened the women very much. He even apologized for scaring them and asked if they could call the nanny. The girls agreed and said it wasn't their fault. After that, they left, continuing to whisper about how strange it was. He was really tired at dawn. Hans heard these conversations perfectly well. He knew why they were having them. Today is June 17th, 853. A whole week has passed since the main character moved into the body of the 15-year-old Count Callisto. He thinks that he must gradually accept that he will live the life of Adrian. When the nanny came to the boy and began to dress him, she noted that he had woken up very early today. The boy confirmed this, saying that his eyes open by themselves, even when he tries to sleep longer. The maid also asked if she should prepare breakfast. Adrian thought for a moment and said that he would like to greet his mother first. This stunned his interlocutor. She said it was a wonderful idea, and that his mother would be very happy to see him. So he soon arrived at his mother's room. She was lying on the bed, and her daughter was sitting next to her. They were both very surprised to see Adrian so early. The boy's mother's name was Adrian von Callisto. His sister's name was Regina von Callisto. Regina asked her brother what had brought him there at such an hour. The woman was surprised that she was asking such a silly question. The girl pointed out that she didn't mean it that way. She was just happy to see them. Owen asked Adrian to come closer on this beautiful morning. 3 years ago, the previous gameman Kalisto had suddenly died, and it so happened that the Countess had fallen ill from the shock. Their daughter was a year younger than Adrian. These three are the only members of the Kalisto family. The county of Kalisto, although located in a remote part of the Rosenbaum Empire, has preserved the wealth and honor of its rather extensive territory with a long history. However, after the death of the previous count, that is, the boy's father, all that was once his became a thing of the past. Due to the pranks of the 12-year-old young heir who took the place of the lord, the county is barely making ends meet, only lending its troops to foreign wars. Perhaps because of all this, his mother's health deteriorated until she died, leaving Regina to deal with the debts. However, things are different now. The boy told his mother that he had been inattentive until now, but that he would visit her more often in the future. It was really nice to hear that, and she was happy. The woman asked her son not to overwork himself. After all, managing the land alone was a heavy burden. He understood that for the sake of these two people, who had known nothing but suffering, it was necessary to settle all matters. Suddenly, as he left his mother's room, a servant approached him. It was the butler, Allman. He reported that Mr. Flynn had come to see him, so he asked if he should escort him to the living room. Adrian was really glad to see this man. He couldn't even hide his joy. The butler was surprised and wondered what was wrong with his master. At that moment, The boy agreed to let him accompany him. It turned out that Allman had been the butler since the time of the previous count. He was a responsible and very reliable man. Whenever the master used violence against the servants, he stepped forward and blocked them. This man shared wise advice with his master, who paid no attention to him, and he also worked hard to maintain order in the house. Around this time, when the butler Allman resigned, the butler said came to take his place. But his incompetence contributed to the count's bankruptcy. So the main character really didn't want this old man to leave. He even wondered if there was any way to prevent him from resigning. And so they came to Mr. Flynn, and the butler announced that he had brought the gentleman. Flynn was the administrator of Count Callisto's house. He wished the gentleman a good morning. When they saw this man, the main characters remembered who he was. This man treated his servants as if they were slaves. Taking his place, the hero inquired what had happened. The man hesitated a little and began to look around, as if worried that someone might overhear them. He noted that, as he had said earlier, a suitable replacement had been found. And now it was time to dismiss Allman. Hans was confused and asked what he was talking about. His companion continued to insist that he would be replaced by his friend Saeed, who was a very reliable person. He was literally like a brother to him. The young count asked him to wait. He apologized for interrupting him and asked if he really wanted to fire Allman. Now Flynn was confused himself, but he thought that it was all a joke and that he had already forgotten about it. He had calmed down lately, forgotten about it, but now he remembered everything. As he spoke, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He took something out and offered it to him. It turned out to be a handful of gold coins. The main character couldn't have expected this to happen. The man noted that the gentleman would not have to dirty his hands. They would drop the theft charges. To this end, he had prepared the necessary accounting records. Adrian saw that there were 10 gold coins. A commoner's family usually lives on 10 silver coins a month. Therefore, 10 gold coins were their living expenses for 20 months. Flynn is Kalisto's administrator. In addition to the minimum subsistence wage, he receives money from his master, but they have no other major sources of income. In other words, the 10 gold coins in his hands were stolen from his own people. Hans now understood everything. It turned out that Adrian Callisto had been taking bribes and allowing strangers to manipulate his own people. The butler Allman did not resign. He was simply fired. Everyone knew that he had been falsely accused, but they kept silent, and the boy was still too young to notice that something was wrong. It turns out that the reasons for this man's behavior are more complicated than he even thought. Suddenly, the boy turned to Oswald. The man was standing behind the door and asked how he could be of service. Flynn couldn't understand what was going on. Oswald was a night guard. So why did his master need him? The count immediately ordered Oswald to arrest Flynn. This was to be done for illegal extortion and attempting to frame his servant. He was to be thrown into prison. The guard said he would do as he was told. The previous interlocutor did not understand what his master was doing. He asked what was going on and where such laws were written. The main character still does not know how or why he ended up in this body. But knowing how much pain his owner had caused countless people, he couldn't just stand by and watch it happen again. Oswald began to lead the criminal away. The latter asked him to be careful. The guard said that the scoundrel should not resist. He couldn't even imagine what he had done. Flynn was very upset that this presumptuous little bastard dared to frame him. They had a sick woman in their family, as well as 2 children. It would not be an exaggeration to say that this family in decline had only one vassal, the old knight. Instead of the count, the dumbest of them rules, and they are easier to control than a healthy dog. It's ridiculous, like a scoundrel throwing a tantrum out of pride. But this little guy needs to realize that the world is not as simple as he thinks it is. In the end, Flynn was thrown behind bars. He asked if the knight was being too harsh with the people. The man ordered him to shut up. He should sit quietly until his master decided on his punishment. The culprit said nothing in response. He only thought about how Oswald was the son of a knight who had served the former lord. All the worthy knights had left. He wondered how he managed to remain loyal to this bastard. Now he must persuade Count Callisto to get rid of him. How would he dare to behave so arrogantly toward him, being just a simple knight? The so-called lord is only 15 years old at the moment. He is lazy and very foolish. For example, when a man offered to raise his taxes, he simply agreed without asking any questions. Most likely, he just threw a tantrum today. But if you flatter him a couple of times, he'll quickly soften up. Suddenly, he heard the guard express surprise that his master had already arrived. Adrian was curious where Flynn was. The administrator continued to think that if the master threw another tantrum, he would simply kneel down. So he pretended to be obedient and was glad that the master had come to him in person. But soon the joy on his face quickly faded when he saw the guy in person. It was unclear what was wrong with this boy. Was he really the same empty-headed brat? Flynn began to justify himself, saying that he was completely wrong. He asked for forgiveness, saying that she had only remembered him once, but the young count said there was no need to ask for his mercy, because from now on, all serious crimes committed on the territory of Kalisto would be tried in court. The suspect was surprised. What did he mean by a court? Was he joking? This was Flynn, the man who had served him for so long. The man begged him for some time not to do this, but the young man simply left. Flynn, though a commoner, serves as an administrator on the territory of Kalisto. The fact that such a person had his property confiscated and was imprisoned on charges of bribery and breach of trust was shocking. Not only did it shock the locals, but it also served as a warning to other administrators who had been negligent or were considering becoming so. In the house of the Count of Callisto, people began to discuss Flynn's trial. It was incredible. No one could remember the last time a court hearing had been held. It was also strange why the Lord had suddenly summoned them. Had someone upset him again? Some even began to speculate that he would throw them out this time. Everyone had already gathered, and the boy was standing right in front of them. He asked the butler if everyone was there. Allman replied that they were. He had summoned all the estate workers. The boy looked at his people. They were all frightened, waiting for what was to happen. Suddenly, the main character began to speak. He said he was sure that the rumors circulating in the Count's house knew very well what kind of lord he had been until now. Some continued to wonder what he meant by that. They just hoped he wouldn't beat them for it. But what happened next surprised them even more. Adrian bowed and asked everyone for forgiveness. No one could believe it. He kept repeating that he had constantly defiled and found fault with others, and had even committed violence for no good reason. He did not ask them to accept his apologies and forgive his sins, but he wanted them to give him a chance to redeem himself. Of course, he knows that he was an unreliable count of the house and lord of the lands of Kalisto. But from now on, he intends to turn Kalisto into a good place to live. A place where everyone will be happy and content. To do this, he must first take care of the people on his estate. From this moment on, he will make gradual changes. At first, this may confuse them, but he hopes they will not distrust him. That is all he wanted to say for now. Everyone froze, unable to believe that such a thing could happen. Soon they began to discuss why he had suddenly decided to make such changes. Madeline said that it had only been a few days since he had kicked her. Therefore, she couldn't understand how a person could change so suddenly. A little later, the main character told Allman that he had done a good job and could now go about his business. The butler said nothing and stood frozen in place. Then he suddenly bowed his head. He asked his master to accept his sincere gratitude. The boy was confused as to what he meant. The butler said that he had heard that the boy had supported him despite Flynn's accusations. Adrian asked him to raise his head. They had known each other for so long that it was only natural. From the very beginning, it had been absurd and groundless slander for taking bribes. He took his companion by the hand. He said that from now on, when similar situations arose, he intended to rectify them so that the innocent would not suffer. He therefore asked if the other man would be able to help him. The man did not expect to hear such a question. After that, he even said that the Lord had changed greatly. He had served him when the previous Lord was still alive, that is, a decade ago. His appearance and demeanor were the same, but today he felt like a different person. He must have made some decision that a simple servant could not comprehend. But he should not worry. He would follow him no matter what. After a while, Hans stood by the window, thinking about what had happened. It turned out that he had not simply been given a second life. Along with the title of Count Callisto, he had gained the right to be lord of this vast territory. Moreover, he even knew in advance what the next 15 years would bring. Whether he was happy or not in the past, he had fulfilled his duties as a count. Therefore, he knew a lot about administrative and political situations and the common people. And this would be an advantage in his new life. Of course, he'll be able to protect his loved ones, his family and servants, who have had a hard time. He will protect his land and its inhabitants. And it was also his desire to give the locals the opportunity to live as they wished, regardless of their status. Of course, this is not easy to achieve for a rural aristocrat working for the prosperity of his land. But I wonder if there is any information about the future that could radically change the situation. Something like unexpected luck? Suddenly, he remembered the words of his subordinates from his past life. They didn't understand what was so special about the dragon's lair. Perhaps at that time he was trying to win the favor of the Townsend ducal house. Finally, the guy understood everything. This was exactly what he needed, and he thought of the dragon's lair. Having made his decision, Adrian set off on his journey. Suddenly, someone addressed him. It was Oswald, who said he looked tired. So why not take a break and rest? In the end, the boy agreed, and they stopped to rest. The guard suggested to his master that they finish the inspection for the day. After all, this place had dangerous mountain terrain. The boy apologized for making everyone work so hard for nothing, but he had no intention of giving up. Several days passed since they set out to conduct the inspection, saying that they were personally surveying the area. In reality, he was searching for the dragon's lair. Dragons, in turn, are the most powerful and one of the most sacred and intelligent creatures on Earth. It is said that each of them has attained divinity. Even though they had long since died out, finding their lair would be enough to turn the world upside down. For there were incredible treasures stored there, and it is in this very mountain that the lair will be discovered in the future. The current Emperor Rosenbaum is nothing more than a puppet. In a situation where the two pillars of the empire, Townsend and McCarthy, maintain a precarious balance, the appearance of a lair in the mountains on the border of their territory will lead to armed conflict over its possession. Unfortunately, Kalisto's territory is also located on this border. Their home sent troops, declaring that it stood on the side of the Townsends. However, it would be another 15 years before the tax authorities discovered this. When his subordinates let their guard down, the guy ran away on his own. He thought about what they said, that dragons collect gold and silver in piles like a mountain. That would be enough to buy a small kingdom. So if Adrian manages to find the lair, he will not only stabilize the situation on his land, but also be able to resolve various issues. It is unknown where exactly in the Compton Mountains this lair is hidden. Rumors that it had been found spread far and wide. A herbalist took the wrong path and got lost in an oak forest, accidentally finding it. They say that at first glance, it is clear that this is a dragon's lair. Therefore, the main character thought that he would understand everything immediately. But after several hours, nothing happened. He was in a depressed state. It's not here. Could he really not find it? Well, the lair, but he couldn't see anything that resembled a cave. Perhaps even the rumors about the herbalist were false. By now, even the sun had set. Why was Adrian's body so weak? He would have to train when he got back. Suddenly, the guy heard voices coming from afar. He was worried that the long search had exhausted the servants. Since he had run away from them, it was clear that they would not leave him alone. So maybe he should ask for help and search together. But no, he couldn't show weakness now. He had no choice but to keep the existence of his hideout a secret. Lost in thought, Adrian lost his concentration. He didn't notice the uneven ground he had fallen onto. His body fell like a stone from a cliff. As a result, the guy didn't even realize what had happened. But soon, the whole city was filled with his screams, as landing on the hard surface was extremely painful. Although he realized that he was still alive, and that was very good. Adrian did fall off the cliff, but he didn't fall all the way to the bottom, stopping on some kind of ledge. He almost died a second time. The main character found out that he had broken several ribs, and now he doesn't understand how to get back. The place he ended up in seemed quite strange to him. He got up thinking about how people say you can recognize a dragon's lair at first glance. Those words were true after all. It seems that the dragon's lair is here. In an unexpected place in the middle of a cliff, it must be the entrance used by the guards, that is, the creatures that protect the dragons. The dragons themselves resorted to teleportation. The slopes of the Compton Mountains are very steep, so no one could find the lair. The only problem is how to climb back up. He doubts that Oswald will find this place. If he dies here, even the gold and silver he finds will be of no use to him. Suddenly, he froze when he reached a new spot. It was a very large room with a beautiful interior. Inside were magical circles, clearly connected to dragons in some way. The young man found it incredible, very beautiful. Could this really be the dragon's house? Gradually, something happened to his body. A warm magic enveloped him. It was incredible. All the wounds he had recently received had healed. This place was clearly an abandoned lair. Could it be that the place itself had healing properties? Then it is incredibly valuable in itself. The main character forced himself to concentrate. Right now, the most important thing for him was to explore every corner. This hideout will be a great asset to him, who has returned to the past and found himself in another person's body. After spending a considerable amount of time searching for the lair, the result was as follows. There were 4 doors leading to the center. Inside, the place has a branched and interconnected structure resembling an anthill. There are so many different spaces that it is impossible to remember each one separately. They say that dragons often turn into humans to enjoy the finery. which explains why they were more interested in human dwellings. There is even a bedroom and a dressing room here. There may not be mountains of treasure here, enough to buy a kingdom, as the rumors say. But he is sure that his find will pay off very soon. The most useful thing here is the center with a magical healing spell. For now, the guy will call it the healing room. It's an amazing place, considering that healing magic has practically disappeared at this time. All that's left is to check out the last room, and then he can go back. The guy entered the room and froze. The expression on his face spoke for itself. There was something amazing there. He even thought it was impossible. Was what he was seeing before him real? Yes, it was a real dragon. Dragons had been extinct on this land for hundreds of years, so it was most likely a corpse. Indeed, if there had been a living dragon in the lair, chaos would have ensued in its previous life. Amazing. Maybe dragons remain so perfect even after death. He should have read about this in his past life. Only Adrian touched the dragon's body. Something began to happen. The dragon's body, which he had thought was dead, began to glow. The young man was stunned. Could this be some kind of magic? A magical formation began to take shape in the center, and it headed toward the main character, who didn't understand what was happening. This magical formation was heading straight for his head, and soon it literally merged with him. Adrian realized that something had entered his head. Even the color of his hair changed, and he began to see some runes. A magical circle also began to glow on the floor near the dragon. The main character found himself in some kind of strange space. He couldn't understand what it all meant. After all, he had only recently been in the dragon's lair, and now he had been transported somewhere else. His thoughts were interrupted by an unfamiliar voice. This stranger noted that humans were the weakest but most inventive of all species. And that was not bad. Realizing what was happening, the hero asked who he was. He had golden hair and an otherworldly energy, as if he were not human. The stranger said his name was Siegfried. He, in turn, was the last head of the Golden Clan and the last dragon on the continent. Adrian couldn't believe it. Was he really a dragon? Did that mean he was the owner of this lair? Siegfried replied that he had understood correctly. He must be very confused right now. Let him explain briefly. He had only touched his empty shell, the life that had already come to an end. The essence that had spoken the last spells to him was what remained. The young man realized that he still did not fully understand. The dragon continued to say that they were like dragons, the most beautiful creatures on earth. But they had been in conflict and competition for centuries. In the end, he became the last dragon on the continent, as dragons were solitary creatures by nature. Therefore, he was not emotionally attached to anyone and remained alone. However, he could not accept that their magic would be buried, and so he made the only decision he could, to leave his knowledge and legacy to a wise being. Specifically, to whoever found his lair by fate, so that dragon magic could continue to exist. His life ended in approximately 354. He designed the spell to last for 500 years after his death. After that time, his body would turn to dust, and dragon magic would be lost to history. He accepted this fate, but his heir still came. Therefore, Siegfried asks the young man to ensure that the power known as magic continues to exist in this world, and in the centuries to come. Confused, the main character shouted that he knew nothing about magic. There are thousands of magicians in the world today. It would take him a very long time to learn it. This made the dragon smile. Siegfried said that he had told him so himself. Now he was his heir, and as soon as he said this, the main character came to his senses. He was in the same dragon's lair and did not understand what was happening. Perhaps it was some kind of hallucination. Turning his head, he noticed the dragon's body. Indeed, as Siegfried had said recently, the last dragon had turned to dust. But his power and magic were not lost in vain, because he left Adriana the dragon's heart. The boy clearly feels the presence of another heart besides his own human one. It was a source of power, hazy like smoke, but filled with magical energy. Almost immediately, information from Siegfried began to flow into his brain through his new heart. There was so much of it that the boy couldn't comprehend it all, but he was certain that he could now use dragon magic. For example, he had just used a ball of light. Indeed, a stream of mana flowed toward his hand, and he recreated a new skill. Unlike humans, who have to create magic, read long spells, and utter incantations, dragons only needed these words. Dragon magic requires special magical power that comes from the dragon's heart, and that heart was left to the boy Siegfried. After a while, the main character flew up into the air, after which he landed rather awkwardly on the ground. Just think, he used all his magical power to climb up. Just think, flying is only a second-level magic. It turns out that his magical power reserves are minimal. Since the dragon heart has not yet taken root, but it will grow in accordance with his body. Very soon, Adrian will be able to use dragon magic close to that of a god. Suddenly, he heard a voice. It was the servants addressing their master. They were very happy to see him, but they had been searching for him for a long time. I wonder if everything is all right with him. Since the main character had reunited with his people, he now sat thinking about what had happened. He had received something he never expected. The heir to the dragon had never been described in historical books. The spell described by Siegfried had a time limit. Today was the 853rd year. This meant that if he had been even a year late, Siegfried's will would have been lost forever. It turned out that in his previous life, they had only found refuge 15 years after that moment. And his will had indeed been lost then. When it comes to magic, most wizards never get more than 1 or 2 circles in their entire lives. It is enough to get the 5th circle to become an archmage. Dragons are born with the 9th circle. They are the most intelligent creatures. Their level far exceeds that of humans. Adrian thought that if he gained the power of a dragon, its capabilities would allow him to realize his wildest dreams. As he was thinking about this, the carriage finally stopped. The coachman informed his master that they had arrived at the estate. Inside, the main character's own sister began to scold him. She didn't understand what kind of stunt this was. He had made them worry with his sudden departure on an expedition to his mountain. There had been no news from him until evening. And what had happened to his clothes? Had he encountered some bandits? The young man replied that he was not injured and that she should not worry. Although he thought he had been wounded, he had recovered. Oswald fell to his knees and began to apologize for what had happened. It was all his fault. He was an old man who couldn't protect his master, even though he called himself a knight. Regina also noted that her brother had been very busy lately. Could something serious have happened? Torn between them, Adrian said that everything was fine. He was fine, so they should just go and rest. After a while, he finally found himself back in his room. He reflected on the fact that Oswald had also been a close associate of the late Count, just like Alman. He had stayed with Kalisto out of a sense of loyalty. Thinking about these 3 people, the guy thought that, fortunately, those who would help him were still on his side. Soon, someone entered the room. It was Alman who asked if his master had called for him. The young man apologized for disturbing him at such a late hour. He was curious about the matter he had entrusted to him before leaving. The man asked if he was referring to compiling a list of rumors and the payroll ledger. He had done everything as requested. Did he really want to see it now? Although it was already late, he had heard that there had been some kind of incident during the expedition. The young gentleman said he was fine and told him to bring the documents. But the butler suggested he rest today and deal with business tomorrow. He could wear himself out. Besides, it wasn't urgent. He was worried that his health might suffer as a result. Adrian asked if he was the only one who was bothering him. The servants' wages and daily work depended on it. How could it not be urgent? He had already taken care of all the most urgent matters, so he told him to bring him the records. The butler understood everything and asked him to wait a moment. He mentioned the urgent matter that had been taken care of. Wasn't the expedition untimely? He had dealt with it. Then the main character asked if Alman knew anything about banks. Life in the city was peaceful as usual. Had someone approached Aunt Rowan? The woman saw that it was Claude. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. Had he come to place an order? The guy said that he wanted everything on the list to be prepared. There were 10 boxes of apples and oranges. It was surprising that there were so many. Claude asked if it would be difficult to get them. Rowan said that everything was fine, she was just very happy. He probably agreed with her that the Lord had changed a lot. After Flynn was punished, taxes were greatly reduced, and orders from the Lord's estate increased. Everyone said that life was now better. If you live long enough, you can live to see such days. In general, she said that she would get everything by evening. She also gave a few apples to Claude himself. This was her way of thanking him. The Lord must have changed because he served him well. The young man said nothing in response, and soon he went back to the estate. Madeline was also heading in his direction. Claude saw the girl and caught her attention. She did not expect to see him there, and when they met, she received an apple. But this surprised her even more. Where did he get this apple? Claude mentioned that he had gone to order fruit, and Aunt Rowan had given it to him. Madeline was surprised. Was he really talking about that stingy aunt? She had always been so mean. The boy replied that she was a completely different person now. Everything had really changed a lot. He was surprised when Flynn was punished, but he couldn't imagine that the other corrupt administrators would also be dismissed. It was very unexpected that the Lord decided to check all the documents. Moreover, he heard that all the immigrants were illegal, but the taxes collected had been returned to the residents. The girl said that if you think about it, there had been changes in their lives too. Suddenly, there was talk of improvements in healthcare. They were given breaks and annual salary increases. Old clothes and bedding were replaced with new ones. Staff satisfaction was now at its highest level. Thanks to this, they now had time to chat. But wasn't the guy happy about that? Claude asked for a moment. Had she already forgotten everything? It had only been a couple of weeks since the Lord had beaten them for no particular reason. People don't change that easily. She had been through it all herself, and she couldn't bring herself to trust the Lord. Madeline said it was true, but there was a but. Now, when she looked at him, she wondered if she was being too prejudiced. Maybe she should try to believe him after all. Then her companion asked if she was going to forgive him because he was handsome, like the other girls had done. Madeline replied that of course she wasn't. She suggested they leave because the break was almost over. It's amazing how time flies when you're having fun. Lord must have left again today. She rarely got to see him these days. The guy confirmed this, saying he had started going on expeditions too often. At that very moment, the main character was in the dragon's lair. There, he used his flying skill. Thanks to this, he was training to fly upward, but that wasn't his only skill. He also used a fireball. With it, he could attack using fire, and his defensive spell was a shield. Adrian thought about how a month had passed since he had inherited the power of the dragon. If he continued to train, his abilities would gradually improve. The more he trained, the more magic he could use, and its power grew stronger. However, it was inconvenient that he had to travel a long way to the lair to practice comfortably. This was where Siegfried's corpse lay. No matter what spell he used, it had destructive power, which was why he trained here. It would be really nice if any place would be suitable for his training. Of course, there was a way. He was talking about the Gate of Displacement. There was a spell that could instantly transport someone to a specific location with precise coordinates. However, this spell is already of the 7th circle. He is currently at the 2nd or 3rd circle as a regular Imperial mage, although an archmage would hardly reach the 5th circle. First, he needed to master the short-range teleportation spell. He had been trying to do so for several days now, and so he repeated the spell once again, expecting nothing new. But something did happen. Amazing, did he really do it? The guy's joy quickly faded when he felt something strange. His body was somewhere else. It seemed as if he had been transported to another dimension. Suddenly, he saw Siegfried, who greeted him. He was adapting faster than expected. The main character did not expect to see a dragon. After congratulating him, his magic surpassed the level of a beginner. As a reward, he opened a new area in the hideout. Let him continue moving forward and gradually get more useful things. Adrian was surprised. Had he arranged everything so that new places would open up in the lair as he grew? But if so, was there any reason for such a restriction? Zygmunt thought about it and explained that the shelter might be found by some pathetic fortune hunter. He would take the treasures for himself and neglect the magic. After that, he simply asked that his heir continue to develop. He wants you to live on, so his magic can continue to exist in this world. Soon, the main character moved back to the dragon's hideout. So that's how it all works. It turns out that there is a room that was impossible to find through the existing passages. No wonder there are rumors that you can buy a kingdom if you find the lair. So far, there was little gold or silver, because the place was hidden by magic. Siegfried said that from now on, more and more places with treasures would be revealed. There were ancient runic symbols written there, and the hero could read them. Could the dragon have given the jewelry its name? Queen of Tears, Spring Evening, and God's Grace were their names. There was a book nearby that needed to be looked at. It told about the artifacts. Artifacts are objects created by a transcendent magical power to fix magical effects on things. They became relics that cannot be replicated, as magic has almost disappeared today. In a previous life, an aristocrat like the main character would not have been able to see them, and his current level is insufficient to create new artifacts. He looked at the first book and put it back. Then he took the second one with similar content inside. It turns out that the shelf is full of books about artifacts. Surprising. Is it possible that he is thinking what I think? Could all the decorations he sees be artifacts? It turns out that there are 10 artifacts in this room. There are also books here that describe each of them in detail. Therefore, it is very easy to choose the one that suits a particular situation. The very first artifact is Spring Evening. It contains healing magic, which was supposedly created by a 7th circle archmage for his sick wife. Healing magic is usually not very effective. The effect of this ring is also likely to simply give strength. but it will definitely help the weakened mother of the main character. The next artifact is called the Dance of Shadows. This work is by a red dragon named Berestein. It looks quite simple, but in reality it is not. When the main character picked it up, some kind of magic began to spread. It turns out that this artifact contains high-level concealment magic. It even hides traces and blocks sounds surprisingly well. Not only is the guy invisible, but he also feels as if his body has no weight. So that's how incredible artifacts are, and it only gets better. The next artifact was in the form of a snake. Adrian put it on his arm. This artifact is called the Breath of the Earth. It is the only work of the golden dragon Siegfried, the owner of this lair. The main function of this artifact is transportation. The coordinates are linked to Siegfried's lair. Therefore, the guy can only move between it and the portal. But he doesn't fully understand where that is. Now that the distance restriction is gone, it will be a little easier for him to train. Who would have thought that learning and mastering something could be so exciting? After a while, the guy decided to return. It turns out that this will be his last trip to Compton Mountain and back. He was really lucky that no one lived there. But soon something made the main character stop. It was a large number of troops under the command of a commander. They ordered Adrian to stop immediately. He did so. He then announced that he was Lord Kalisto. He demanded that they introduce themselves and explain why they had invaded foreign territory without permission. The commander decided to speak with him. He noted that they had told the truth after all, that Lord Kalisto was just a child. His name was Pete Ross. He was a count and commander of the first Knights of the Empire. The hero was surprised that he was called a child. The influence of the capital and border nobles varies, and there is also a difference in age between them. But they were clearly on the same level now. And this man had addressed him so sharply at their first meeting. Mutual respect was a basic form of politeness among nobles. Therefore, he asked what had brought Count Ross here. The man did not expect the count to know what was going on, since this was a rural area. He didn't have time to explain everything, so he would only tell him what business he was here on. The House of Rodriguez had committed treason, and they were pursuing Raquia de Rodriguez to punish her. To carry out His Majesty's orders as quickly as possible, Count Callisto must also cooperate and bring all his forces to bear. The name of this man was well known to the main character. Raquia de Rodriguez is the greatest fencing genius on the continent. He achieved the title of Master Swordsman at the age of 16. His fate is tragic, as he died because of the betrayal of his house. It is rumored that Raquia was a close friend of His Majesty, and they spent a lot of time together since childhood. His Majesty especially trusted and relied on him as a friend and mentor since he was crown prince. However, when His Majesty ascended the throne at a young age, the situation changed dramatically. The young emperor became a mere puppet in the hands of the Townsend and McCarthy houses. The imperial forces were subjected to daily purges. The Rodriguez house must have been surrounded at that time as well. The main character still remembers the news that the traitor Rodriguez was acquitted of false charges and reinstated 5 years later. This happened when the Count's house had already been destroyed, and the whole empire was in turmoil with voices mourning the young genius. Raquia de Rodriguez, an unparalleled genius whose life was cut short at the age of 20 after receiving the title of Grand Master, fell victim to a power struggle. Adrian had no doubt that this man must be saved. While the young man was thinking, Pete became indignant. Was he not listening to him? The criminal was seriously wounded and had taken this path. Perhaps his youth made it difficult for him to understand the seriousness of the situation. The main character did not like this situation. This man treated him like a subordinate, but he said that Kalisto would help them. How about stopping the search for today and resuming at dawn tomorrow with combined forces? The arrogant interlocutor noted that he doubted that soldiers from the hinterland would be of much use. There were enough forces and orders to pursue a wounded man. Suddenly, the Lord said that the Compton Mountains were not suitable for searching on horseback. Besides, they were all in armor. Just look at his own knights. The Count looked at his subordinates and saw that they were indeed struggling. Thus, he declared that there was nothing to be done, and that they would continue the search tomorrow. The hero thought about how a similar incident had occurred in his previous life, while searching for a hideout. The Townsends, together with their powerful order of knights, had requested support from Kalisto. Of course, searching in the mountains is more difficult than looking for a needle in a haystack, and Mount Compton is one of the most dangerous places in the entire empire. Adrian was able to find the hideout thanks to information from his past life, as well as luck. But finding a wounded man hiding in one day is practically impossible. However, he had no intention of giving up. He noticed that there was no one around. He then used his new dragon magic and a skill called Search. Thanks to this powerful ability, the main character could sense everything around him. He expanded the search range wider and wider but still couldn't sense anyone, until he found a waterfall, and only then did he find everything. He immediately rushed in that direction and stopped near a wounded man. The man he encountered was clearly the fugitive criminal Rocky D. Rodriguez. The main character approached him to examine his wounds. It turned out that they were indeed very deep. Unfortunately, the guy had not yet mastered the magic of healing. Although this artifact was weak, it was better than nothing. Now it was necessary to move the wounded man to a safe place. And for this, the hero used another skill. He decided to try to save this man in this way. By nightfall, he was riding through the forest with him. But after a while, he stopped near a building, afraid. And he did so for good reason, because it was an imperial flag already flying in front of the estate. As he had expected, the knights arrived first. However, everything would be fine if he didn't panic. To hide himself and the wounded man, he used another artifact. Thus, there was nothing but emptiness where they had been standing. After some time, posters were hung on the walls announcing the search for Rocky D. Rodriguez. The people in the city did not understand what was happening. They say that there has been a betrayal in the capital. The suspect has light hair, clear blue eyes, and must be brought back alive or dead. A subordinate informed Count Ross that they had wanted posters throughout the territory, starting with the Lord's estate. The man was pleased to hear this. Speaking of Kalisto, a village is a village. What a shabby estate they have. Perhaps it would be better to stay at an inn rather than with them. After these words, Ross drank some water that had been brought to him. But he didn't like it, and immediately threw the glass away. He had never met such a rude servant. The Count shouted that the water was warm and asked what kind of attitude this was toward imperial knights. Did the servant apologize? At that moment, Regina arrived. She asked them to refrain from violence. They had suddenly had to accommodate many people late at night. So she asked for understanding regarding certain shortcomings. The captain of the knights asked in surprise who she was. The girl replied that her name was Adrian von Callisto, and that she was the Lord's younger sister. This caused Count Ross to chuckle, given that only youngsters were around. He advised the young girl not to meddle in grown-up affairs and to head to sleep. Regina was outraged that a representative of the Empire could be so shameless and uncouth. From her expression, it was clear that she was very angry. She is the representative of the owner of this estate and the territory of Count Adrian von Callisto. Therefore, she asked him to show respect and behave in a manner befitting a knight and an aristocrat. Ross couldn't believe his ears. Both relatives were complete ignoramuses. At that moment, the girl was thinking only of her brother. She had no idea where he was. The guy was taking care of the wounded at the time. Adriana was lucky to make it to her chambers unnoticed, but he was truly ashamed. He wanted to apologize to his sister. He would sort everything out soon. He had simply walked past her and the Count using his invisibility skill. At the moment, the situation had become more complicated than he had even expected. Wanted posters had already been distributed throughout the area, and there was nowhere left to go. Who knew that knights would raid his estate? The ones he saw in the forest were only a small part of them. Rodriguez urgently needed medical attention because at this rate, he would simply die. Suddenly, she heard the door to the room where he was staying slam open. It turned out to be Madeline's maid. The girl was rubbing the Count's wound. She panicked and apologized, thinking that no one was there. But then the guy thought that in this situation, that was the best option. So he asked her to quietly call Alman so that no one would find out. In the end, the butler arrived at his master's side quite quickly. He thought he had left, but it turned out that he hadn't. He had to go down to the hall first. They say that there has been a betrayal in the capital, and now the Imperial Knights are at their estate. The main character interrupted him and said that he had something to show the two of them. Then he led them to the wounded Rodrigo. Both were terrified. This man was the one they were looking for. Had Mr. Adrian personally captured the traitor Rodriguez? Sir, he objected, he is not a traitor. The young man couldn't explain it now, but he was being pursued on false charges. Therefore, he planned to protect him for a while. But as they know, in the current situation, he cannot accomplish this task alone. Therefore, he desperately needs the help of Alman and Madeline. They clearly weren't expecting such a request. Adrian was well aware that this might seem strange to them. He was a border lord with no connections to the imperial family. It was also impossible that he was acquainted with Rodriguez, a powerful figure in the capital. Moreover, they were servants who had no choice but to obey their master's orders. Thus, they were in a position where they could easily report everything to another aristocrat. And yet the young man had hoped for their help. So he turned to Madeline again. He asked if she could take care of him. In one case, His master would assign her exclusively to his chambers. The girl objected, saying she did not know how to treat the wounded. The Lord told her to just serve him food and dress his wounds. He would compensate her fully. She should just help him this once. But he asked Almond to find a corpse with a similar appearance. The man was confused, not understanding what he wanted. Looking at him, he repeated that he needed the corpse of a young man of similar build with light hair. Blue eyes would be good, but not necessarily the same. The man was confused as to why his master was saying such things. The guy, of course, understood perfectly well that this was an unreasonable request. It would be difficult, but he asked him to help because he had to save this man. He tried everything to change things, but for them it was only a brief moment. He was an immature, unworthy gentleman, whom the servants could not look at without reproach. His words could be the catalyst that would force them to report him. But now all that remains is to hope that they believe he has changed. Right now they need to believe him. Suddenly, Almond turned to the gentleman. He told him that there were ranks among the aristocracy as well. Imperial commanders were like gods and could not be opposed. But he was a butler, serving Count Callisto. He wondered if the Count had really decided everything himself. He was worried that someone had demanded it of him or pressured him into it. The young man thought that this was quite possible, as he was just a boy who had received the title of Count at the age of 15. Before blindly agreeing, he checks to see if any pressure was exerted on him. Because the boy is the perfect candidate for manipulation, which Flynn took advantage of. The hero doesn't understand how the previous Adrian Callisto could have fired such a person. In the end, he told the man that it was his will. This choice will help their land and its people. After these words, the butler bowed and said that he understood everything. Therefore, he would obtain a corpse that matched the Lord's description. Madeline also bowed and said she would do her best for her master. Adrian exhaled calmly. He was truly glad that his subordinates were helping him. After a while, Regina reported that she could not allow them to enter the room, but the knights said that they had been ordered to search every corner of the estate. The girl was indignant in these chambers. They were caring for their sick mother, so they should leave. Suddenly, a voice from nearby caught their attention. The main character asked what they were doing. It turned out that they had come with swords and were trying to enter the chambers of a noble lady, despite the fact that she was ill. But the knight said that he had heard the house and that the number would cooperate. Adrian explained that he had indeed agreed to cooperate, but he never said he would support the search. In his opinion, their duty to the Imperial commander had been fulfilled. And this happened at the very moment when they provided shelter and support to his people. Was he wrong? Didn't the Imperial decree mention unauthorized searches? The knight said nothing in response and simply walked away in indignation. Thus, he left the main character and his sister alone. Regina immediately asked if her brother was all right. After all, these people had reported that a traitor was wandering around outside. The couple did not apologize for arriving too late. She was probably frightened by this unexpected situation, but he was grateful that she had handled it on her own. She behaved very maturely in this situation. The praise came as a surprise to the girl. She wondered if he had been nearby when she was talking to the commander. The guy realized that he had given himself away, so he tried to smooth things over. Later, his mother complained that the traitor had entered their territory. It was simply outrageous. Let the children be careful and never give in to the Imperial Knights. They already hesitated and angered them. The hero asked her not to worry, saying that his people would also participate in the search. They say that the criminal was seriously wounded, so he will be found quickly. There is something more important. During the expedition, he met an old foreign woman. When he helped her, she gave him a ring as a gift and said that it contained a special energy. Yes, the kind that can gradually restore health. The woman was surprised that her child had started to believe in such things. The guy said that he wanted her to have the ring anyway. As he spoke, he put the ring on her hand, and she began to examine it. Soon, to her surprise, she said that she actually felt as if she had been relieved. Surprisingly, it was also a yellow sapphire, and judging by its size, it was very valuable. The sister asked if some old woman had really given it to her brother. The main character understood that if it became known that the simple ring was an artifact more valuable than the estate, it would cause a real commotion. Adrian and Madeline take turns guarding Rakia's chambers. The maid guards during the day, and he guards at night. Since the young man had always stayed awake at night when he was a servant, he had grown accustomed to it. Thanks to the dragon's heart, fatigue seemed to accumulate much more slowly. Right now, that's not the main problem. The question is whether it is acceptable to leave Rodriguez in this condition. The hero cleans the blood and pus, but the wound is too deep. Someone knocked on the door. Adrian heard exactly 5 knocks. It turned out that he and Madeline had agreed on a code knock. There would have been a problem if other servants had entered. Opening the door, The guy greeted the maid. Then he asked if anything suspicious had happened. She said everything was fine. At that moment, the hero noticed a basket. Could it be herbs? The girl explained that the young man's internal injuries seemed serious. That's why she brought some herbs that disinfect well and also have healing properties. Adrian was surprised, but did she know how to use them? The girl explained that her father was an herbalist, so she had learned a little by watching him work. The guy thought that, come to think of it, Madeline often brewed herbal teas, saying that she had learned about them from her father. He thought she just liked plants, but it turned out to be something else. In fact, the main characters also know how to work with herbs, but the girl was much better at it, and she bandaged Rodriguez's wounds. Adrian thought how lucky he was that she had this knowledge. Now all that remained was to hope that Rodriguez would recover, and everything would be fine. And then, despite expectations, he didn't wake up after 5 days. Madeline didn't understand what was happening, or what the problem was. The wounds were definitely well bandaged, but if Rocky didn't start drinking more water, there would be problems. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by what she saw in the room. She even dropped the basket. It turned out that there was no one on the bed where the sick man had been lying all this time. The man himself was already in another room. He had gone there on his own. Sitting in a chair, he did not understand what was happening or how he had ended up there. Then there was a scream, warning everyone to be careful. The body of Raquia de Rodriguez was found near the Compton Mountains. The knight couldn't believe it. While he was recovering from his surprise, people were ordered to get ready and move out immediately. Raquia was about to find out what had happened, but suddenly heard a voice behind him. It was the main character, who said that his reaction was expected. He could see that Lord Rodriguez was in good health and had already regained consciousness. In fact, the main character had noticed earlier that Rodriguez had regained consciousness, thanks to his dragon heart. His senses were heightened, so he noticed the change in his breathing. The reason he continued to pretend to be unconscious was probably because the situation seemed really suspicious to him. The entire empire was hunting him as a traitor. Therefore, the fact that he was lying in the bed of a nobleman while a boy and a girl were taking care of him seemed very strange. Right now, this man fears Adrian, and that is why he grabbed the first thing that came to hand and pointed it at him. Then he asked them to tell him their names. Could he be in cahoots with those scoundrels on the street who attacked him? The main character approached closer to explain everything, but his interlocutor, as you noted, did not come close. Then the hero asked him to calm down, saying that it was too early to worry so much. He said he would explain everything and suggested they sit down and talk. The man decided to trust him, so he put down the weapon he was holding and sat down. Adrian thought that was great. Now everything depended on his persuasiveness. Soon, Rodriguez noted that he thought the corpse these people had found was a fake. It was probably the work of Mr. Adrian. The hero confirmed this, saying that he had dressed a corpse of similar build in Rakia's clothes and put his family ring on it. He apologized for taking it without permission, but that was the situation. Suddenly, his interlocutor interrupted him. Pete Ross, the commander who was pursuing him, knew very well what he looked like. He would not be fooled by a body that only vaguely resembled him. Adrian objected, saying that it was August. The body had been thrown into a swamp to decompose naturally. The knights had grown very tired of searching the forest over the past few days. Commander Ross himself would also like to finish the search as soon as possible. The hero noted that Lord Rodriguez would wait 5 years for the false charges against him to be dropped. Until then, he asked that his secret remain here in Kalisto. Rocky couldn't understand how this guy knew the charges were false. Was he somehow involved in what had happened? The guy said he couldn't tell him. Then the man asked what would change in 5 years. Well, Adrian couldn't let him tell him that either. If he just trusted him, everything would be fine. Rodriguez then jumped up and shouted that he didn't need to listen to any more of this. He was truly grateful for the help, but he had no intention of entrusting his safety to someone who refused to answer his questions. For Rodriguez, who had been betrayed in an instant and had become a traitor along with his family, everyone in the Empire was now an enemy, and the main character understood this perfectly well. That's why he used his illusion skill. He thought that if he wanted to gain this man's trust, he would have to reveal himself. The man's face and head began to change after the skill was used. He was confused. This was impossible. It was an illusion spell. This was surprising because it was a 4th-level spell. Moreover, Adrian had only uttered a single word of encouragement. But how was this possible? Even an Imperial Archmage was incapable of such a feat. Adrian turned to Raquia. He said that he couldn't reveal much and understood his wariness. But at the same time, he could guarantee that he would not harm either His Majesty or himself. So now he was asking only for trust and not to ask too many questions. After thinking about it for a while, the man finally agreed. He believed that the young man meant him no harm. Adrian was pleased. At least he had managed to reduce his hostility. However, since he was the Emperor's fencing instructor, the young man thought he had a gentle nature, although perhaps it was just a matter of perception, as if he had been attacked by an angry cat. After a while, Commander Ross arrived at the Emperor's side. He reported that he had come to inform His Majesty personally that Rocky D. Rodriguez was dead. The Emperor replied coldly that he understood everything. The knight was surprised. Was he dissatisfied? The family of the traitor who tried to send His Majesty to his death had been destroyed. The Emperor confirmed that this was good, and that the commander had done well. He appreciated his achievements. Ross was delighted and asked to be allowed to leave. He then wished him a good rest. Thus, the Emperor was once again left alone with his destructive thoughts. He was in despair. Was Rakia's death really so meaningless? But let him wait a little longer. Even if he couldn't save him, he would certainly restore his honor. At that time, Rodriguez remained at the estate of Count Callisto. Opposite him sat Regina, watching intently. Suddenly, she quietly turned to Alman, who was also in the room. She asked if it was really this young man whom her brother had brought as a new guard. Was he a worthy man? The butler confirmed this. He said that he had picked him up. That is, met him during an expedition. Was the girl embarrassed by this? She was a little confused, but that was not the case. Regina could clearly see how distinguished this man looked. No matter how you looked at him, he looked like an aristocrat. But surprisingly, he had become a guard in such a remote place. The butler decided to change the subject a little. He asked the lady if she knew why the young gentleman had called him to his office. The girl replied that she didn't know, but surely he didn't know either. While they were chatting, Rocky thought about how only 3 people knew who he really was. That's why they were pretending. Each of them worried him, but they had helped him nonetheless. And the most suspicious one was Adrian. The main character arrived just then and apologized for keeping them waiting. Kalisto had always been a powerless provincial territory. Moreover, if he became a lord at the age of 12, he had no experience. The idea of a fake corpse is clearly unusual. Moreover, he convinced him well, even though he is an imperial knight and a count. He, in turn, is not only reserved, but often seems more mature than Raki himself. The organization of the entire estate is also unexpectedly good. Even in the imperial capital, the service staff do not have such cheerful faces as here. Everyone looks genuinely satisfied. Could all this really have been organized by a 15-year-old lord? I wonder what Adrian Callisto is really like. 10 minutes later, Rodriguez felt like he was going mad, and all because of what the main character had said. He was going to open a bank. Rocky jumped up and shouted that he might not know how the world works. But did he understand how much money it takes to open a bank, and how many people had gone bankrupt trying to do so in the past? The hero replied that he knew all that, and he also knew why this had happened. Rodriguez still thought he didn't know anything. Banking was a business where even big shots went bankrupt when they tried to get ahead. Adrian said that it might seem that banking is all about real estate and capital. But the most important thing is having well-trained staff. He was referring, of course, to accountants, asset managers, and investment product compliance officers, as well as security guards who ensure the safety of valuables and deal with illegal intrusions. Realistically speaking, it would be virtually impossible for Kalisto to assemble such experts without connections. That is why they will start by opening an academy to train local commoners. It will be divided into departments of accounting and security. Rodriguez was once again surprised that this guy thinks deeper than he appears at first glance. Although that doesn't mean the plan has become any more realistic. Regina objected, asking whether commoners could afford to study at the academy. Such institutions were usually built for aristocrats. Adrian confirmed that she was right. That was why their academy would not charge tuition. The butler couldn't believe that his master meant to say that he would teach for free. The hero didn't understand what he was talking about. Would workers agree to become students? They would pay the students salaries, not teach them for free. Those present were confused. Had he really said out loud that this was an academy where they paid for tuition? After a short while, the butler explained the plan. It was an explanation of Mr. Adrian's plan to establish the Kalisto Bank. His Excellency said that the most promising students should be selected from among the servants. Therefore, anyone who was interested should contact him. Someone asked if they would really be paid salaries for studying at the academy. Alman immediately confirmed this. The daily wage would be reduced during class hours, but it would be enough so that it would not affect their well-being. Everyone immediately became busy. Perhaps they should agree. Some thought they would become smart enough, while others wanted to go to the security department. Claude was confused. He had no idea what the Lord was up to. This was about academies for aristocrats. But how could commoners like them study accounting and security? Madeline pointed out that he was meticulous and good with numbers, which is why he always ran errands in town. So why not give it a try? The young man replied that without thinking, these were completely different things. What would change if they learned at their age that they were not just servants and nothing more? The girl was taken aback and suddenly said that she would leave the estate. Claude was surprised that she had suddenly brought this up. Madeline explained that she had recently helped the master with something, and he said that as a token of his gratitude, he would allow her to study medicine. At first, she tried to refuse because she thought it wasn't for her, but earlier, she had overheard an interesting conversation. Reiki asked if it was really just a maid who had nursed him back to health. Adrian confirmed this. The girl said that it was nothing, she had just used ordinary herbs. But Rodriguez said that thanks to her, he had survived, so he was very grateful to her. So now the girl said that the situation made her proud of herself and happy. She would heal people with her own hands and her knowledge could save lives. Even if it was a foolish idea, she wanted to try it anyway. That's why the girl wants Claude to try it too. After all, when else will he have such an opportunity? Maybe there was something they could do themselves. In the end, she convinced him, and now he has already started his studies. Together with the other students, he studied diligently. Although sometimes the thought still crossed his mind that he was out of place here. His salary had increased, so working on the estate was a little more profitable. It was unclear why he had suddenly decided to study. While the young man was thinking about this, the teacher looked at his work. He said that Claude was doing very well, as all his answers were correct. The boy explained that he had used an abacus, and that anyone could do the same. However, the teacher objected that simple counting was one thing. But even students, aristocrats who had been studying since their youth, found double-entry bookkeeping difficult. To be honest, he had been hired to be an accountant, but was suddenly asked to teach commoners. At first he was skeptical because he did not expect them to achieve such high results. The teacher of the accounting department is called Poiter. He can say with certainty that Claude will become an amazing accountant. Man, I can't believe it. Will he really succeed? But no, he wants to do it, he can do it. Their Lord Count Callisto believes in them all. Things were much worse in another department. Rodriguez was training some of the guys who had arrived at this department. He told Mr. Adrian that it was useless to teach these underachievers. Not long before that, they had arrived at the department full of confidence. One of the main guys said he came here because they promised to pay him. Could it be that their instructor looks like a regular womanizer? Rocky couldn't stand it, and soon they were beaten and continued to train. The man said he didn't know what was going on in the accounting department, but the security department was full of thugs and hooligans who didn't even have any strength. And training these crybabies was a complete waste of time. Besides, did Kalisto really want him to turn this rabble into a knightly order? He cunningly made him a fencing instructor. Who does he think these knights are? Does he really think anyone can become one? The hero noted that this path was difficult, of course, and suggested going inside first to discuss it. He had heard that Rodriguez was His Majesty's mentor, and that he was also highly skilled. Rocky said that His Majesty himself had asked him, but he didn't want to compare him to commoners. Adrian explained that he was talking about his experience as a mentor. There was no order of knights in his territory. Sir Oswald was all alone, and he was already getting old. Let them just be from different lands. Surely their ears cannot be so different from His Majesty's. His companion was outraged, asking what kind of blasphemy this was. The hero replied that noble knights and commoners were the same people, but with different surroundings. Everyone needs someone who will recognize and develop their talents. The young man believes that he can be relied upon. Rodriguez was surprised. He knew that this young man was clearly unusual, but how could anyone believe such nonsense? So he said that it would take more time and resources than the boy thought. Adrian said that was obvious. He trusted him completely and was ready to follow his expert opinion. Such a cheerful guy made Rakia very wary. He noted that the guys seemed comfortable with him. At first, he struggled with not being able to talk to him informally. Now things seem to be getting better, more or less. Of course, it's much better than feeling awkward. But has he relaxed too much? Adrian repeated that he was a very reliable and good person, that he didn't even think about such things. With his simplicity, he surprised the man again. Confused, the man said that Adrian should stop talking nonsense. He wouldn't be able to get the medal anyway, so he might as well know that. And once again, the main characters felt that strange feeling. Rodriguez returned to his new subordinates. There he saw something that caught his interest. The guys he had forced to do push-ups were still doing them. This guy was the one who had stepped forward that time. It was surprising that he had stayed in position, even while he was away. However, he wasn't the only one who had managed to stay up. Only a few guys had given up. Rocky immediately remembered Adrian's words. He had said that it didn't matter whether they were noble knights or simple soldiers. They were all the same people, just with different surroundings. Everyone needed someone who would recognize and nurture their talents. Rocky ordered everyone to stand up immediately. Let them listen to him carefully. To become strong, you don't need muscles and quick movements, but only fighting spirit and perseverance. It doesn't matter whether it was through anger or stubbornness. Those who have survived now have basic qualifications. Let them not forget today's lesson. And for now, their lessons are here. In fact, the tourist had planned to live peacefully in the countryside for the promised 5 years. But it would not be bad to pass the time with all sorts of nonsense. In 800, an academy was founded to create the Kalisto Bank. It was divided into departments of accounting and security, teaching specialized knowledge. The students were exclusively local residents. And now, 3 years have passed since it was founded. The Countess was in good health and was strolling through the garden. Suddenly she heard her daughter's voice calling out to her. The girl was surprised why she had come outside. Her mother said that the weather was getting warmer and she just wanted to go out for the first time in a long time. Regina objected, saying that it was still cool and that she should take it easy and not overexert herself. Her mother noted that it smelled like spring, of damp soil, new shoots, and blossoming flowers. Yes, that's exactly what spring smells like. The spring breeze rarely reached her windows, and she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. So she asked her daughter if she wanted to go for a walk with her. The former Countess Kalisto, who once could not even stand up, now walks on her own. Much had changed on the estate over the past 3 years. Several men had come to see her. They informed her that she owed taxes. This was true. The tax for residents was 20% of their income, so she still owed 30 silver coins and 70 copper coins. The woman was surprised by the amount. She couldn't pay that much so suddenly. The inspector said that this time he was just paying her a visit to inform her. But next time, if she was late, she would be fined. Suddenly, the woman's son came out. He pointed out that the offense was a serious charge. It was Claude. He asked if the revised tax code had not come into effect last month. For low-income households earning less than 10 gold coins a year, income tax is adjusted based on the number of workers. Taking into account the deduction for long-term residents, they had paid everything correctly and did not owe a single copper coin. The inspector realized he had picked the wrong person, so he said there had been a mistake and it needed to be checked. But Claude stopped them. He had heard that these gentlemen had made the same mistake with the Brooks last week. If he heard of anything similar again, he would file an official complaint. It's hard to believe that people like that still exist. The woman was surprised. Would everything really be all right? The guy said everything was fine, but he had to go. They were almost done getting the bank ready to open, so he would be late again today. His mother said that it was good that Claude knew a lot, but he shouldn't argue too much with officials. Suddenly something might happen, and they would try to take revenge on him. The young man calmly replied that there was no need to worry, because their lord would take care of everything. The maid knocked on the door. She was surprised that no one answered, as they had only just arrived. The head maid saw her and greeted her. She explained to the girls that when a sign like that was hanging, they weren't even supposed to knock. She must be new and didn't know that. The girl apologized, saying that perhaps the master was busy with something important. The woman did not know. But when the sign was hanging, even Sarakia, the knight bodyguard, was not allowed to enter. Besides, their lord would hardly be doing anything inappropriate. At that moment, Adrian moved to another dimension. There he greeted Siegfried. They hadn't seen each other in a long time, about 3 years. The dragon did the same. It had indeed been a long time. It turned out that the guy had reached the middle level before he found out that he now had the 6th circle. Adrian said that he still couldn't believe that a court mage only had the 5th circle, while he already had the 6th. Siegfried also noted that he had managed to properly form a dragon's heart. Now he would be able to use large-scale spells. Just think, he had grown so much in only 3 years, starting out as an ordinary human. I wonder if he trains his own followers. Adrian was surprised by this question. Siegfried explained that every great mage has his own followers. His goal is to preserve magic in this world. He hopes that even in 1,000 or 10,000 years, this wonderful legacy will still be alive. That is his only desire and his greatest regret. Of course, how the boy would deal with what he left behind was his concern. Having become Siegfried's heir, the main character spent the next 3 years constantly discovering new areas in the hideout. Every day, hidden treasures appeared. Passing through a room filled with magical artifacts, the boy found himself in another room strewn with mana stones. All he had to do was sell everything there to become the richest man in the empire. But Siegfried didn't leave it there so that the guy could become rich or famous. Therefore, he must pay the price for the opportunity to enjoy his legacy. The hero noted that if we were to talk about it, he had been thinking about something. Decades ago, people created a bank. It is a place where you can borrow money and invest it to make a profit. Using Siegfried's legacy as capital, the young man plans to go into banking. The dragon noted that this has existed for a very long time. It is called usury. Adrian objected, saying that this is completely different. As soon as he successfully opens the bank and secures the money, he plans to found a magic academy to continue Siegfried's legacy. Nowadays, academies have departments of magic. But in reality, magic has long been in decline and has been relegated to the sidelines. Few people try to become magicians, as it is almost impossible to achieve more than 1 or 2 circles in a lifetime. Magic is no longer really taught or studied. It seems to have been left in the past. But with the power left behind by Siegfried, he will try to revive it. He will have not 1 or 2 followers, but dozens and even hundreds of those who will study magic and pass on their knowledge to future generations. The dragon thought about this, and he liked it. Sounds interesting enough. Let him try. Adrian wondered if he was unhappy. His companion pointed out that he was just talking to a ghost left behind after his death. After a while, the main character returned to his familiar world. The administration of the territory was running smoothly. Over the past 3 years, both the Academy's work and the reorganization of the territory's workforce have also gone smoothly. Even in his previous life, nothing happened in the rocky area. Preparations for opening a bank are going without any major problems. Earlier, Rodriguez reported that the knights needed to be equipped with armor and swords. Adrian asked if this was really necessary. He remembered that he had said that it would be impossible to establish an order. The man confirmed his words to the knight. After all, they would not be fighting wild beasts, but other people. He had already brought them into shape, and now he needed weapons and equipment to survive. At that moment, the hero thought that thanks to their armor, they would only survive if they did not receive a direct blow from a spear, as had happened to him in his previous life. Rocky was right after all. In the past, Kalisto was an undeveloped region with almost no threats. But now everything had changed, so it was necessary to prepare for war in advance. Adrian used his search skill. If he remembered correctly from his past life, iron ore veins had been found in the Compton Mountains. If he could find them, it would be a major breakthrough. But suddenly the young man noticed something else. I wonder what that is. A huge golden light was emanating from it. The guy had never felt such an aura before. As he got closer to the source, the guy figured out what it was. In front of him, he saw a cat that appeared to be wounded. However, this creature was too large to be a cat, and it had a huge wound. Adrian decided to help this creature. He used healing and feathers. As it happened, he had already picked up 2 similar strays on this mountain. At the time, the guy didn't realize that this casual remark would become a reality. Now he was standing at the entrance to the room, and Rocky was shouting for him to open it. Let him do it right now, because the guard doesn't understand what's going on, and the main character himself knew nothing about it. There was someone else in his room. It was a man who greeted the confused Adrian. Last night, the hero thought that everything was worse than it seemed. The wounded cat's breathing was weak, so he decided to take care of the wounds first. The main source of extraction was still the dragon's lair. Adrian couldn't bring Rakia to the healing hall because he wanted to keep the lair a secret. But it's just a cat, so everything will be fine. The guy used his purification skill, and the creature's visible wounds gradually closed. Everything was fine now. All that remained was to wait until the creature regained consciousness. Then he could return, which would probably take about 10 minutes. Although nothing happened after 3 hours, the hero even thought that he was just sleeping. And if he didn't return by morning, Reiki would find out everything. Because they had breakfast together every morning. And he couldn't leave the cat in the den. So, soon the hero found himself in his bed with this cat. He apologized for bringing him home today, saying they would sleep together. After breakfast, he would take him back home. Just as the guy was thinking about this, the cat transformed into a human form. Adrian wasn't expecting this, so he was scared and screamed at the top of his lungs. Rodriguez immediately arrived at his chambers. He asked if everything was all right. He demanded that he open the door immediately and explain what was going on. So that's how it all happened. To explain himself, The hero said that a huge beetle had flown into his room. He apologized to Rakiyam and said he would have breakfast later. In the end, the personal knight left. Then the hero asked the creature who he was, and how did he end up in his chambers. Usually if someone wakes up and finds a stranger in their bed, they should call security. But when he saw its golden hair, Adrian became curious. The cat transformed and asked how he got there. Did he bring him there without permission? The main character was stunned, knowing that he was from the cat race. This mysterious race lives in society, but is cut off from the human world. They have lived here as long as elves and gnomes. But because of their extreme caution, they do not show themselves to humans. Therefore, very little is known about them. The cat transformed into a human form and said that he liked it here, so he intends to stay here. Adrian objected, saying he couldn't just decide that. But his companion didn't understand why, since he had brought him here himself. It turned out that he had kidnapped him and healed him without permission. Therefore, he was now responsible for him. The main character found him very persistent. Perhaps she hadn't even slept while she was healing him, but there was nothing to be done. He could have died if he hadn't treated his wounds yesterday. Don't the physical abilities of the cat people exceed those of humans? It's unlikely that a wild animal or a human could have inflicted such serious wounds. Could it be that he was attacked by one of his own kind, leaving him with nowhere to go? While they were talking, the door to the room was kicked in. The main character was flustered. He didn't want Raki to see this creature. The knight, in turn, immediately grabbed his weapon. He pointed it at the cat and told Adrian to step away from it immediately. In the end, the main character understood what had happened. Rodriguez was a master swordsman, and therefore, he could sense unusual magical energy, just like him with his search spell. The cat had no intention of giving up. He said that this man was a coward and tried to attack him, but he couldn't let that happen. He used a spell called Moment. As a result, he moved and found himself right between Rakia and the cat. The opponents did not expect this to happen, so they quickly jumped back a short distance. Count Callisto asked Rakia to calm down. Something had happened to him, so he decided to take him in for a while. Therefore, the man should not be hostile towards him. Rodriguez was outraged. Why would someone do such a thing in public? What was this all about? He was his guard after all, and he had brought strangers into his home in the middle of the night. He even blocked the path of his sword. Perhaps he was insane or simply wanted to get himself hurt. What was he thinking when he did that? Adrian simply apologized, saying he understood his mistake. He did it because he knew that none of them would harm him. The cat was a little ashamed that they were shouting at his savior. Raki added that the cat people's concepts and common sense differ from those of humans. He doesn't know what situation this little guy found himself in, but letting him in here was reckless. Suddenly the cat said something. He wasn't a little one, his name was Asa. The main character was delighted that he had given his name. He asked him to come closer and shake hands. The men didn't want to do it, but in the end, they did. Thus, Adrian's number of fateful encounters on Compton Mountain doubled. Asa seems to have complicated circumstances, and one day he will open up to him and tell him everything. He doesn't want to pressure a child who has only just recovered. He's just worried that these two have crazy personalities. Still, he thinks they'll get along. After a while, Asa came to Adrian and said he was bored. He was hungry, so he asked for something to eat. Rodriguez was in the room. He said that the master was busy. Unlike cats, who only eat, he is a lord who runs the academy and is preparing to open a bank. And Reiki was doing his job as a guard and couldn't help with the bank opening. And this cat was only thinking about snacks. Did he even know what a bank was? Suddenly Adrian entered the room and asked Rakia not to be rude to him. The man noted that he had a lot of work to do and no time for his entertainment. But Adrian replied that everything was fine. He was already finished. Tomorrow, the first Kalisto bank would open in the capital. This is the Empire of Rosenbaum. If one had to choose the richest person in the country, many would name the defense minister, not the emperor or the duke. This man is none other than Baron Sylvan, Dominic Sylvan. He was the one who started the first banking business and dominated the financial world. Many aristocrats and bourgeois tried to get into banking, but no one could surpass Sylvan's monopoly. One day, the Baron asked his subordinate to report everything in order of importance. The subordinate began to speak. First, a summons from His Majesty the Duke of McCarthy. Apparently, this was related to imperial protocol. Dominic said that was surprising. His Majesty was still indulging this petty man, but it was still a summons from His Majesty, so they had to respond. He told him to add it to the schedule earlier that evening. The subordinate said he would do so, and that they could move on. Duke Chunish asked for another month to think it over. The man was surprised. It was nonsense. Who else but his bank could cover the debt? How foolish of him to continue to cling to his pride. At that moment, the advisor announced that there was something else important to discuss. A new bank had opened in the capital. It seemed to be run by the House of Kalisto, but so far they only had one branch. Dominic remembered that it was the Southern House. He hadn't heard of anyone making a significant investment in them. They weren't known for doing any notable business. They had jumped into this field recklessly, so they would surely go bankrupt soon. He told his subordinate to ignore them and bring him the contract with Chinovis. The subordinate said he would take care of it. He would double-check to make sure they really had no other sources of funding. Soon there was a commotion on the street. A woman asked what was going on. She was asked if she hadn't heard that a new bank had opened. They say that the building was just constructed for the entire capital, and it's the talk of the town. The woman didn't understand what the fuss was about. It was a place for aristocrats. Her companion objected that this was not the case, that this bank was unusual. A person could open an account for just 1 penny, and loans were given without any collateral. Amazing, a loan without collateral? With a minimum payment of 1 gold coin to open an account. The credit system, which required collateral of equal value, had long been designed only for aristocrats. The Kalisto Bank was different. The man who had been vaccinated said that his monthly income was about 12 silver coins. The employee noted that in that case, she recommended investing 2 silver coins a month to start with. With such a deposit, the interest would only grow over the course of a year. Next to him, an old man asked if it was true that he could borrow money without collateral. The employee replied that it was true. At Kalisto Bank, his credit rating is assessed based on his source of income, household income, and debt repayment, and a suitable credit limit is set for him. The details are described in this document, so please read it at your convenience. The old man, of course, took note of the document, but he said that they could read, so he wouldn't understand anything, and that he would come back another time. The employee immediately apologized, saying that he was sorry to inconvenience such an important customer. Would he mind if he explained everything in words to make it easier for him? The old man did not expect such kindness towards him. Opening up access to finance for ordinary people may seem like a waste of money and effort, since they have no financial support. The bank employees were mainly interested in their working days, relatives, and whether they lived in the same house. They were also interested in whether people owned any real estate. Expanding the customer base is undoubtedly beneficial for both parties. As a result, many people were able to open their own bank accounts. Some of them did not even think that anything would come of it. But they really are opening accounts for a few pennies. Suddenly, the employee told the woman that her lottery ticket number was 91. The woman was surprised, not understanding what was happening. It turns out that to celebrate the opening of Kalisto Bank, they are giving out lottery tickets to everyone who opens an account this month. You had to tear it in half and put 1/2 in the lottery box. In a month, the employees would announce the 3 winners and give them their prizes. The woman asked if the prize was money. The employee said that it was true. The first would receive 25 gold coins, the second 10, and the third 5. Incredible, 25 gold coins, and there will be 3 winners. Many immediately rushed to open accounts. All they had to do was deposit a minimum of 1 copper coin. They even decided to invite their relatives to participate. Alman watched what was happening closely. He told his companion that his idea had become a hit. He spoke with Claude, who had suggested the idea. The idea of a credit rating also belonged to him. This was to be expected from the best student at the academy. The guy objected that this was not the case, that other students had also helped him come up with it. To allow ordinary people without collateral to borrow money according to the gentleman's plan, they needed to determine how to assess their ability to repay. Suddenly a girl joined the conversation. She informed the gentleman that they had just reached their goal of opening 100 accounts, and there were still 4 hours left in the workday. Claude found this incredible. The girl was very happy, and they already had more than 30 loan applications. Alman said that the Count would be touched by this. Claude was very happy, and would gladly tell him about it. It would be great if he could see all this with his own eyes. Bankers and security guards, who had trained at the academy for 3 years, did their jobs just as well as employees of aristocratic banks. Customers didn't seem to have any problems either. They did what the gentleman wanted, and they created a bank for literally all aristocrats and commoners. After some time, the main character received information. It seems that Claude and Alman are doing well in the capital. They had easily achieved their goal, and everything was going very smoothly. They should be given a good bonus for this. Regina noted that it was impressive. She couldn't believe that her brother was running an entire bank. The young man was pleased to hear this, and suddenly asked if she would like to try it herself. The girl asked in surprise what he meant. Was he really talking about running a business? The hero added that when he was still immature, she studied management instead of him. Did she think she would continue her studies, or use what she had already learned? She could do anything she wanted, study, run a business, and he would help her. His mother was happy to hear this after all the difficulties she had endured raising her. Regina said that even if that were the case, she didn't know what she could do in Kalisto. She didn't have any special talents like him. Adrian said he had already thought about it. So, how about going to the capital? The guy told Rakia and Asa about it too. He wants to introduce them both to high society and stay there to see how things go. I wonder what Rakia will say about this. The man noted that he was his bodyguard and that it was a silly question. The guy was really happy. 5 years is a guaranteed period of time during which Rakia's name will be cleared. For the past 3 years, he has performed his duties as a fencing instructor and bodyguard without complaint. There were many suspicious moments, and it was strange to go to the capital. But he agreed. Great, Adrian is glad that Rakia is on the case. I wonder what about Asa? While the hero was talking, he was already flying towards him. In his opinion, this whole thing was very amusing. Rodriguez was very upset by this situation. He had asked him not to jump around like a monkey. The cat pointed out that he was clumsy, but he was agile, so there would be no problems. The guard objected, telling him not to make anyone laugh. Did he really think his fragile body could withstand such attacks? Asa didn't understand what she was talking about. How could she talk about her own master like that? Adrian was terrified at that moment. These 2 family members were going to the capital together. Would everything be all right? After a while, everyone was ready to leave. Regina was surprised that her brother was riding in a different carriage. He told her that he would follow behind, so she shouldn't worry. His sister still didn't understand why they were traveling separately, since the journey to the capital would take half a month. He felt that the 2 of them were still uncomfortable with each other, so it would be better for him to stay close to them for now. Regina thought he was talking about the night guard he had found during an expedition 3 years ago, and also the boy he had met during a recent expedition. Her brother did pick up a lot of people on his expeditions. Adrian explained that Reiki had saved him from bandits, and Asa had also helped by chance. His sister noticed that even the ring he had given to his mother had been given to him by an old woman from the same area. The main character didn't know what to say to that. He simply turned around and told her to call him if anything happened. Then Regina realized that she would never get an answer from him. It was obvious that he had more and more secrets. It was unclear how much he planned to hide from them. His mother noted that even if it was annoying, she suggested they just observe for now. He would tell them everything when he was ready. After all, he was a valuable member of their family. At the end of the road, Asa was in complete shock. Is this really the capital everyone talks about? The knight indignantly asked him to sit still, as he was rocking the carriage. At that moment, Adrian wondered if everything would be all right with Rakia. He and Asa knew nothing here. But for him, it was both his homeland and enemy territory. The cat threw open the door and asked Adrian to look at something cool. At that moment, the hero asked him not to open the door while the carriage was moving, as it was dangerous. Soon, Asa was hit on the head by the knight. He should just sit quietly and do what he's told the first time. Asa was outraged, wondering who this idiot thought he was. Adrian realized that if these 2 were left alone, they would kill each other. They couldn't be left alone because they would definitely do something crazy. The butler Alman met the lord at the palace. He had arrived earlier than planned. The hero thought that it must have been difficult for him to travel alone. Could this really be Kalisto's new home? If so, he had found a really good place in a short time. The butler said that he had understood everything correctly. True, there was still a lot to do. But overall, everything was in order. The houses were used as residences for aristocrats in large cities outside their territory. Kalisto didn't have one before, as they rarely left their estates. But now they finally have one. It seems that they will spend more time together here than at home. Just in case, he mapped out a route through the area. Alman asked if his master was going straight to the bank. Perhaps he would rest after 2 weeks of traveling. Adrian noted that his mother and Regina should rest, but since the bank belonged to him, he needed to visit it at least once. Asa shouted that he also wanted to go with him, to take him along. The hero said that they weren't going there to play, so he was going on business. His companion objected, saying that he was taking Rakia with him. Although it was self-evident, he was a knight after all. Asa was terrified. Did he really mean for him to stay there alone? Then the main character realized that he couldn't leave him alone. Soon they arrived at the bank together. Adriana thought there were far more people here than had been described in the chat. The butler explained that it was lottery day. The host had just announced that they were starting to meet people at their places. The lucky number was 318. A happy woman from the crowd said that she had that number. The crowd stirred. Were they really giving out the prize? It was a huge amount of money. They began to push and shove, almost crushing each other. Did Alman apologize for what happened? Usually the security guards can handle the crowd, but today was an exception. A little confused, the main character simply asked him to make sure everything went smoothly. What the guy saw really impressed him. Just think, the bank they founded is doing so well. Ace felt uncomfortable. There were so many people here. Were they really going to stay? The hero suggested that perhaps they should go back. Suddenly he noted that since they were in the capital, why not go shopping? Soon they found themselves in a store. The humanoid cat informed them that things were not the same here as in the stores they were used to. Although that was obvious, they were in the capital after all. Count Callisto suggested trying on some clothes. To celebrate their move, he would buy them anything they wanted. Asa became very interested and began to choose everything that caught his eye. Soon he announced that he had already chosen everything he wanted. Adrian found the pattern intricate. He asked if they should have clothes made from it. The cat objected that there was no need to do that, neither sew nor cut, he would just buy it. He wanted it exactly like that. The hero agreed, because it was just fabric, was he sure? His companion confirmed this. Then he put the fabric on himself, and said that everyone in his homeland dressed like that. Adrian said that it really suited Ace. It looked like some kind of animal style of clothing. Then he shifted his attention and asked about Rakia, but the man didn't understand why a knight would need clothes. The gentleman explained that new clothes would lift his spirits and make him look good. Or instead, he could buy a sword. Did he want him to buy something better for himself? The man simply replied that it was enough. From his voice, the guy realized that something was wrong. At that moment, they passed by a certain man. That man was also a knight and noticed Rakia. The subordinate asked the commander if something was wrong. The commander replied that everything was fine. But he thought about how he thought he heard the voice of Rakia de Rodriguez. Near the bank of Kalisto, it was still bustling even in the evening. Some people were discussing that the man who had entered the bank was an aristocrat. It was surprising that even aristocrats came here. This man headed to a meeting with the manager of the bank's main branch. Poiter said he was terribly sorry, but he was just the branch manager. Therefore, he couldn't give him an answer. The aristocrat asked if he could arrange a meeting with the bank's owner, Adrian von Callisto. In the end, the meeting took place. It turned out that this man was the eldest son of Duke Chenovis, and his name was Adrian von Chenovis. He had come to ask his bank for a loan of 7,000 gold coins. After this statement, silence fell upon the room. Poiter was greatly surprised by such a sum. He had already been informed about it, but hearing it a second time, the figure did not seem any less outrageous to him. How did the gentleman intend to give him such a huge amount of money? Adrian had just finished shopping and was about to return home when he was urgently summoned by bank employees on behalf of a very important client. It turned out that the eldest son of Duke Chenovis had arrived. A crazy sum of 7,000 gold coins. This was not something that an ordinary manager could approve. He learned that the owner of the bank himself had come to town and decided to appeal to him directly. The main character asked if he could find out why he needed such a large sum. Of course, they recognized that the Chenovis family was noble, but the amount requested greatly exceeded a standard loan. Therefore, it was necessary to find out where the money would go before giving an answer. Duran was shocked. Did he really mean that Callisto's bank had enough capital to lend 10,000 gold coins? Adrian said that such a sum was indeed available. This stunned his interlocutor even more. After that, he became a little confused and began to tell his story. To tell the truth, the Chenovises were once recognized as one of the 10 richest families in the empire, thanks to the fact that they owned the largest milling region in Chernich. Chernich is a place blessed by the goddess of the earth. It is a fertile region where even every family enjoys a bountiful harvest every autumn. It produces most of the grain reserves for the entire empire. Therefore, many generations of the Chenov family remained wealthy, putting in minimal effort to cultivate their farmland. One might ask, what is the problem? The problem is that the current duke has become addicted to gambling. Liquid assets must be found quickly. And to cover his losses, he began to raise the stakes higher and higher, plunging deeper into debt, until he finally mortgaged all his property. And now his debt has grown to 7,000 gold pieces. The only institution capable of lending such a large sum is the Sylvan Bank, which has enormous financial power. but it demanded Chernish as collateral. Duran knows that it may seem pathetic, but Chernish's family cannot lose it. It is not just land, it is a symbol of pride and heritage. Adrian was surprised that the Sylvan Bank called it a loan and not a sale. Considering the annual income from Chernish, they could easily pay it off in a couple of years. Poiter coughed to get his attention. Then the hero told his interlocutor that he understood his situation. He needed to have a quick chat with a colleague, so he asked him to wait and have some tea. The man said he understood, but his gaze said a lot. It seemed that he would be refused here as well. Poiters informed the gentleman that as soon as Chernik was handed over as collateral, he would effectively be lost. Adrian did not understand why his value exceeded 7,000 gold pieces. The financier noted that this was correct. Did the Lord really think that the Sylvan Bank would sit quietly and allow him to pay off the debt? He would do everything in his power to prevent the debt from being repaid, which was necessary to seize Chernich. That was why the Chenoweths were still holding on, clinging to the last thread of hope. In fact, everyone in the capital already knew about their situation with Sylvan. But even so, his request is absurd. He has no assets in Chernish, refuses to use any alternatives, and only demands money. Without that territory, the Chenovises are nothing, and their duke is addicted to gambling. The main character thought about it. To tell the truth, the Kalisto Bank, or rather he himself, could lie about almost any amount, because he had already opened all the rooms in Siegfried's lair. And yet, throwing money around out of sentiment or pride would lead to chaos. The guy had to be careful with his spending to hide his true identity. It would be impossible to remember what happened to the Chenovisas in his past life. Kalisto is a remote area, and news from the capital reaches there only sporadically. It is unclear whether this family gave Chernish the Bank of Sylvan or went bankrupt. It is necessary to think about it to remember something related to this. It took some time, but the main character in the field connected the dots in his head, linking grain and food supplies. After that, he quickly went to the room where Duran had been waiting for him all this time. He remembered something that was supposed to happen in a couple of years. Therefore, he informed Lord Chenovis that he would receive 7,000 gold pieces without having to provide collateral. Poiter and the recipient himself couldn't believe it. The subordinate asked his master to think about it again. Adrian, in turn, asked him to simply leave, as he would personally conduct the transaction. The interlocutor was confused. He did not like this situation at all. Of course, he agreed, because disobeying his master was out of the question. Duran also couldn't believe what had happened. As soon as their family fell into debt, they began to be ridiculed and despised. Glancing greedily at Chernish, he was already ready to give up. Suddenly, the bank approved the loan without any collateral. He came here clinging to his last hope and found salvation after all. The hero drew attention to himself. The fool stood up and thanked the Lord for his generosity, asking how he could repay him. The man said that was not necessary. He was not in the business of charity and offered him a legal contract. Now the man was at a loss, as he had nothing to offer as collateral. Then the squad pulled out a document and said that everything was in order. 2 promises sealed on paper are enough. Soon Baron Sylvan received new news, and he was furious, and all because of Count Adrian von Callisto. This young man is only 18 years old, but he became a count at 12. His closest relatives are his mother and younger sister. He is currently involved in banking. He opened a family bank last month. The territory is impressive in size, but most of it is swampland and wasteland. There is little land suitable for cultivation, so the population is kept to a minimum. There are no mines or other sources of income, nothing confirmed. As for artifacts, the territory is so undeveloped that there is little information available. The Baron was outraged. Then how the hell did this happen? How could a village idiot give out a loan of 7,000 gold pieces? The subordinate muttered confusedly that it was necessary to continue the investigation. The Lord was incredibly angry. Did that guy know how hard he had tried to take over Chernish? It had taken him years to get the old fool to sit down at the gaming table. Let his subordinates find out where he got the money, what was involved, and what was taken as collateral. Let them not miss a single detail. He also asked if Count Callisto was currently in the capital. After a while, the main character received a letter. Ace was curious what it was. Had Adrian just arrived and was already receiving letters? The main character recounted that he had received an invitation to a banquet. The invitation cordially invited the Count and his companions to the banquet. Count Ole Haysbert asked Adrian to honor him with his presence. The main character was surprised that it was Count Haysbert, whom he had never met, but he had sent him an invitation. Rodriguez did not really understand what was so surprising about this. After all, he was the talk of the capital. The dispute between the Genovisas and the Sylvan Bank was already the center of attention. Therefore, when Count Callisto approved a loan of 7,000 gold pieces, the news spread instantly. The Kalisto Bank had a modest image as a bank serving mainly commoners. Therefore, everyone was surprised that it had enough capital for such a large loan, even bankers. As a result, Kalisto soon became the center of countless rumors and conversations. The main characters told their family that their father had managed their finances well, and that they had some extra money left over. But this time, everything had happened too quickly. Next time they lent large sums of money, they would have to be more careful. He asked the two if they would go with him. Surprisingly, they both said in unison that they wanted to. The guy didn't understand why no one would recognize Rakia. The man explained that he simply hated ceremonies. Then, Adrian wondered why the wasp didn't want to have fun. He thought he would enjoy such an event. His companion called him stupid, saying he liked playing with him but didn't care about strangers. He especially disliked places where one had to dress up like that, and wanted to stay at home. Rakia even thought that he knew what propriety was, surprisingly. Adrian wondered if there had also been banquets where Asa used to live. After a while, the event was in full swing. The girls usually chatted about fashion boutiques and other brand-name stores. The men, like proper aristocrats, discussed profitable business deals. But soon, new guests caught everyone's attention. The main character, Count Callisto, arrived with his family. Those present began to talk about them, as they had already heard about them before. Could this young man really be Count Callisto? He looks younger than they expected, still a teenager. There are also rumors that the Chenovis family is going into banking at such a young age, which is simply amazing. But isn't the Callisto estate very far away? It's incredible when you look at the dresses these girls are wearing. They've never seen clothes like this before. They're both classic and modern in style. Where were they made? Could this be another bold move by Callisto? Soon, curiosity got the better of one of the girls, and she turned to Regina. She asked if she could find out her name. She would like to introduce them all. The girl immediately gave her name. She said they could just call her by her first name. Adrian was relieved after that, because his family had finally been accepted into society. It turns out that today's participation in the questionnaire was actually necessary for Regina's debut in society. She has a combination of wisdom, enthusiasm, and genius. In her past life, caring for her mother and managing the household prevented her from making friends. Therefore, the main character hopes that in this life, she will be able to enjoy this world in peace. And this debut is just the first step. Fortunately, the rare dresses suited these people well. Suddenly, Adrian heard a voice behind him that startled him. Actually, the person who did it apologized, saying he didn't mean to scare him. He was pleased to meet Count Milligan. Next to him was Viscount Roxon. The young man was still confused, but said he was glad to meet him. His companion noted that his bank was thriving, which was great. Opening an account for a penny was truly an ingenious idea. The guy thanked them, but he sensed something was wrong, and then the two men exchanged glances. They wanted to say something. Milligan had heard that the guy had recently borrowed 7,000 gold coins from Count Chenovis, and they say he didn't even take out a loan to cover it. Adrian said he couldn't reveal all the details of the deal, but it was all true. His companions were very curious to know how he had managed to raise such a large sum of money. The bank would go bankrupt if his investments did not live up to expectations. I wonder if he has any backup plan. The Count asked him not to talk about such things and to watch his language. Adrian said that everything was fine, that the Viscount must have really interested the Kalisto Bank. Fortunately, there was no risk of bankruptcy. Then the men began to insist that they also had businesses. The recent economic downturn had led to some losses, but they would all be recouped in the next quarter. If they could find a little more funding, that would be great. The second man, however, had a loan that needed to be repaid. He was at risk of losing his property. Managing property has become quite difficult, and now, unfortunately, the crisis has begun. Adrian had expected this, so he was not surprised. He said that if they wanted to apply for a loan, they should visit their bank during business hours on weekdays, and they would help them. The Count said that he would feel uncomfortable if he lent them money personally instead. But the main character wasn't going to fall for that trick. He coldly repeated that they should go to the bank for advice and to continue the loan process. This tone knocked the wind out of his interlocutor, and while we were still confused about the son, the mother approached us. The men left, and the guy asked what had happened. The woman apologized for interfering in the conversation, but asked if he had seen Regina. Adrian said he hadn't seen her, because she was with her. The mother began to explain. She thought everything would be fine if the girls talked to each other, so she left. But she disappeared. None of the other debutantes had seen her either. The main character asked her not to worry, that he would find his sister, and that his mother should rest for now. She noted that rest would not hurt, but it was strange that her daughter was nowhere to be found. Where could she have gone? Adrian thought about the fact that neither his mother nor Regina had ever been to such places before. And then they could have gotten lost. She couldn't have gone far in such a short time. To find her quickly and efficiently, he used his search skills. Thanks to this, he easily checked every corner of the room, but he was surprised that he didn't see his sister anywhere. Could Regina really not be in the hall? In that case, he decided to expand the search area and found her in the garden. So he went outside and started shouting her name to get her attention. As soon as he did, he heard a woman scream. It was clearly his sister's voice, so the guy rushed forward, using his acceleration skill. Not far from where he was, there was a man who appeared to have attacked Regina. This was no ordinary man. He wielded a sword and had already attempted to attack. His blade was clearly higher than yours. Adrian thought that things were going badly. Rocky usually took care of his safety, but he had willingly allowed him to go to the banquet. Since there is one rule when attending social events, carrying weapons is prohibited. At that moment, the hero used his skill and found himself in front of his sister. He decided to protect her and used another skill to deflect the attack. Thanks to this, the man's weapon was thrown away. Suddenly, an enemy wizard appeared. He turned to the fearless hero and challenged him with all his power. He wanted him to block this blow. Thanks to this law, a shield appeared around the wizard and the man holding the weapon. This situation threw Adrian off balance. Who was this man? Could he also be a wizard? For now, it didn't matter who he was. He wasn't going to forgive anyone who threatened his family. Therefore, the hero decided to attack using a wind arrow. This technique easily passed through the protective shield, but it didn't hurt the enemies. It just flew past their heads. Suddenly, the sorceress shouted His Majesty's name. Regina herself asked her brother what he was doing. Adrian realized that the situation was not so simple. Could this really be His Majesty the Emperor? A little earlier, an interesting situation had occurred. Regina was asked how things were organized in Kalisto. The girl noted that it was very different from the imperial capital. It was quiet and simple, but she liked the peaceful atmosphere. Speaking of this, the girl turned her attention to the open window. Her companion asked if something was wrong. Regina simply apologized, saying she wanted to go out and get some fresh air alone. The aristocrat said she could do that in Count Haysbert's famous garden, so let her take her time and look around. Thus, Regina left them. The girls were disappointed because they didn't have time to ask her where she bought her dress. Although it was her first banquet, she must have been very tired. While they continued chatting, the girl found herself already on the street. There she examined the local infrastructure, wondering what kind of tree it was. And then she unexpectedly received an answer that the tree was a lilac. It was the guy who apologized for interrupting her thoughts. He also liked her scent. So he answered without thinking. Could it be that she also liked plants? Regina was a little taken aback and said that, to be honest, she didn't know much about them. Although she liked the smell, it would be nice to plant this tree along the streets of the estate. His Majesty noted that he understood that it would be quite expensive. Lilacs were rare even in aristocratic gardens and were not particularly suitable for decoration. The girl interrupted him and said that it seemed they were thinking differently. She simply imagined herself standing not behind the garden fence, but on a spacious street, blooming when the time comes, rustling in the wind, and everyone passing by could smell its fragrance. What could be more beautiful than that? At that moment, the Emperor saw Regina's beautiful face. He was embarrassed by the sight. The girl noticed that something was wrong with her companion, so she apologized. She suddenly started daydreaming about some nonsense. She didn't even understand what was wrong with her. Why was she telling this man she had never met before? She didn't even know him, and it seemed rude. A moment later, they tried to address each other. Regina apologized and asked to be let in and to speak first. But the guy said that he should apologize. Let her say what she wanted to say. The girl said she just wanted to ask his name, that's all. While she was talking, a snake slithered past her. Like any other girl, Regina was frightened and started screaming. She was terrified because the creature was getting closer and closer. His Majesty turned off the light so that it would stand still. Now he would deal with this creature. And at that very moment, the main character appeared. By the way, he didn't even notice that he had crushed the snake. In the end, it turned out that this was how it all happened. Adrian immediately apologized, saying he regretted mistaking him for a murderer. Regina also apologized for not recognizing him and behaving rudely. But the emperor said there was no need to apologize. It was all a mistake. He had rushed to get his weapon. At a banquet, only rulers are allowed to carry weapons. Fortunately, no one was hurt. Look, he knew this man very well. He is Emperor Rosenbaum Lights Krovel Carter III. So, the man who always seems to be the emperor's shadow is an imperial magician, the holder of the highest fifth circle in the empire, Duke Rambly Ivan. Soon, screams began to reach the scene. Someone heard the noise and was about to go and see what had happened. Adrian realized that they didn't need any extra ears or eyes here, so he used his illusion skills. Thanks to this, they were hidden from prying eyes. The guards arrived at the scene fairly quickly, but they saw no one there. Perhaps the scream had come from somewhere else. They decided to search the east wing, so they all ran there. In the end, Adriano explained that he had mechanically set up the barrier because he was worried that His Majesty would be dragged away due to a mistake in the ensuing commotion. Those people didn't see them, so they shouldn't worry. While he was explaining, Regina was horrified that her brother was using magic. The Imperial Mage couldn't believe it either. It was an illusion. Could it really have been her 6th level spell? No. What was more important was that he had used it by uttering just one word, not a spell. He couldn't have been mistaken about that. The main character simply apologized, saying that Duke Ivan should accept his apology first. The wizard shouted that it didn't matter now. The emperor tried to calm him down. He was rewarded for his help in avoiding unnecessary trouble. Therefore, he asked if he could learn their names. The main character asked to be allowed to introduce himself. His name was Count Adrian von Callisto. Regina also introduced herself. The emperor was surprised. He had not expected this of them. It turned out that they both belonged to the Kalisto family. The current emperor of Rosenbaum was politically linked to the Townsends and the McCarthys. He was a puppet with no strong allies. He is obliged to avoid demonstrations of closeness to any particular aristocratic family. Lights hoped that next time they would be able to talk longer. As a result, His Majesty rarely appears in public, and yet he did come to the banquet. Adrian suggested that Regina return. His mother was worried that she had not been able to find him, but the girl asked if her brother shouldn't explain himself first. He was a little taken aback and hesitated. His companion saw that he was evading the question and asked him not to do so. The hero replied that he would tell her about it a little later. For now, they needed to continue having fun. But when they went inside together, they noticed strange looks directed at them. Adrian didn't understand what had happened, but something was definitely wrong here. He felt an ominous energy spreading throughout the estate. Regina, meanwhile, finally reached her mother. She quietly asked what had happened. Everyone was looking at them strangely and coldly. The woman replied that she wasn't sure, but as soon as that gentleman entered, the atmosphere changed. Adrian became curious about who she was talking about, so he looked over. It turned out to be Baron Sylvan. He informed Count Haysbert that it was a great disappointment that people had been unable to sneak into his banquet. It was necessary to deal with them. During a debut in society, it is customary to greet every guest. The Count asked the Lord to be understanding and kind. After all, they had come from the countryside, and their awkwardness was understandable. Regina was touched and wanted to say that this was not proper etiquette. But Adrian stopped her. He understood that this was indeed a wise tactic. There used to be a tradition of greeting every guest. But it changed several decades ago, and no one does it anymore. The Callistos are an ancient aristocratic family, so they know about this custom. If they started insisting on it now, they would be called rude and uncivilized. The one who brought this up was Baron Sylvan. Count Haysbert noted that he was well versed in etiquette. Dominic Sylvan, owner of the Sylvan Bank and founder of the banking business. Even prominent families of restorers owe his bank money. Few dare to challenge him, even with their titles. Adrian was well aware that there would be a fight over the Chinovis. But he never thought he would resort to such a despicable move at the banquet. After what happened, people started fighting among themselves. Then the guy wondered what to do and how to act. Of course, he could have endured it, but his mother and Regina were there. Besides, it was her debut today. It was all his fault. He should have thought things through when he received the invitation. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice addressing him. It turned out to be Duran, who had recently borrowed a large sum of money from the young man. Once again, rumors spread throughout the hall that it was the eldest son, Chinovis, who was collecting the debt. Lord Chinovis noted that he had been looking for Count Callisto as soon as he heard of his arrival. He asked him to allow him to introduce his dear friends, O'Connor and Patel. The men greeted Adrian, saying it was an honor to meet him. The young man noted that he was also pleased to meet them. Some continued to look critically at everything. But there was also another girl. She ran up to Regina and asked if they could continue their conversation. Regina, of course, agreed. The mood changed dramatically as soon as Lord Chinovis spoke. The atmosphere was now completely different. The banquet continued. Duran helped the main character get out of this situation. After a while, the hero and the girl went out onto the balcony to talk. Duran apologized for behaving too familiarly. He had simply seen that he was in a difficult position. Mr. Sylvan often did such things. The hero said that everything was fine. Thanks to him, he had avoided embarrassment and was grateful for that. He is respected by the others. Adrian did not expect to attract attention so quickly. His companion explained that it was all thanks to his father's reputation, not his own. The guy, he thought, was probably talking about Duke Chinovis. Duran said he understood everything correctly. He had always behaved well and was accepted in all social circles, although now he was famous for his gambling addiction. If Adrian hadn't been here, he wouldn't have come here. He was truly grateful to the Count for saving their home. In fact, the main characters did not help him out of pity. He had no idea what kind of person he was or what his reputation was. Hearing what Poiter said, he compared the situation to what he knew from his past life and made a decision. But he did not know what kind of person Lord Chinovis would turn out to be, just like the Emperor. If His Majesty hadn't been so understanding, everything could have escalated into a confrontation. So, in many ways, the young man showed good judgment. But he still cannot shape the future with capital and magic alone. He needs information. After returning from the banquet, he told his mother and Regina some things about himself, namely that he had become a wizard and was more powerful than the Archmage himself. Of course, everyone was greatly surprised when they heard this information. They tried to get more information out of him, but he couldn't say anything more. And the issue here is not about trust in his family. At the moment, he has little strength, so he needs to minimize his involvement in the affairs of the Empire. If rumors about the dragon spread, he will not be able to resolve this conflict. His mother noted that she knew he was hiding something, but she didn't think he had become a mage. Regina said that this was no joke. She didn't understand what kind of spell it was. The court mage found it very strange. Adrian asked his sister not to tell anyone about the magic. She agreed, of course, although she was not thrilled about it. The girl then asked what about the two people following him. Did they know about it? The guy remembered that he had used magic in front of them, so he told her that they probably knew. The family was outraged that he had hidden it from them but told friends he barely knew. That was going too far. At that moment, the two were standing behind the door and heard the entire conversation. Soon, his mother told her son that he didn't need to tell them everything, but he should never put himself in danger. His safety was paramount. Adrian agreed. He would not give them any reason to worry. He was grateful that they had always believed in him. The goal of this new life for the main character was not to become stronger or to take revenge on someone. Right now, he wanted to change the world much more. That is precisely why he must be careful. He can take it slow, one step at a time. I think that's why Adrian went to some abandoned hut and used magic there. Asa saw him go in and wondered if it was just a warehouse. Why did Adrian go there again? It's strange. Rodriguez said he had forgotten about it. As usual, he never tells them anything. His companion thought that even though he was pretending to be tough, he clearly cared. The man was indignant. Enough with the sarcasm. Asa was also furious. Who was he raising his voice at? Let him not start it. Their conflict continued as before. They argued with each other for a long time. At that moment, Regina was in her room, thinking about what had happened today. Suddenly, the situation with the Emperor today flashed through her mind. This lilac made the girl feel embarrassed. That's how the night passed in the capital for everyone who was lost in their thoughts. A young man sat at a table, building a house out of cards. A girl sitting in the same room turned to Jeffron with indignation. Stop loafing around. If you have time for this, go to work. The guy objected, saying that there was no work to be had. Then his companion told him to find some, instead of sitting around doing nothing. Jeffrion explained that they were an information guild. Was it worth handing out leaflets on the street? How ignorant must an aristocrat be to come to them? The rumors must have already spread. He told the lady that it was time to give up. Suddenly, the girl heard a voice at the door. He said he was looking for a lost bird. It was Adrian. He knocked on the door and asked if this was the right place, as it looked more modest than he had imagined. Reiki noted that 5 years ago it had definitely been here. Suddenly, Jeffron opened the door. The guy asked what color the missing bird was. Looking at him, he replied that it was blue. This was the code word to enter. The only thing the main character lacked, besides time and money, was this information. This became especially acute after the banquet at Count Haysbert's. His memories of his past life were limited to the county of Kalisto. They were not important events that affected the entire empire. That is why he came to the Information Guild, which Reiki knew. The head of the guild, Luzin, is called Annabelle. The girl was very happy that someone had come to them. The hero greeted her, glad to meet her. He was just about to introduce himself. Annabelle said that it was an honor for them to welcome Count Callisto. Their guild was very flattered by his visit. Adrian was surprised. Did she really know who he was? The girl said, how could she not know the owner of the Kalisto Bank and the savior of the Chinovis family? Besides, he had recently made his official debut in society. If you look closely, his bodyguard also looks quite familiar. It was very strange, but she couldn't remember him. And that was the cat that had arrived with him. Their eyes met. After that, the girl grabbed Asa and said she had never seen such a large cat before. He was very cute. He's so soft, but why is he so heavy? He's not fat, just a little chubby. Annabelle from the Luzin Guild is a reliable leader who founded the guild in her youth. Fortunately, she didn't pay any attention to Rakia or Asu. The girl noted that Adrian must have connections in the capital, and yet he turned to them. Perhaps it was because they had recently become famous. The hero said that their guild had been thriving, and was one of the leading information guilds in the capital. That is, until they touched someone's collection and received retaliation. The guild was practically destroyed, and the aristocrats stopped turning to them out of fear of him. The girl was probably checking to see if the count knew this. Annabelle was pleased. He knew a lot of information after all. Everyone in the capital knew that Lord Angus had isolated their guild, but they didn't know if it was related to the collection. I wonder where Adrian got that information. The hero said that this is what they do. They track and find information. To most people, Adrian von Callisto is a naive and young aristocrat. After hearing this information, the girl noted that she had underestimated the count. Business relationships begin when both sides are equal. I wonder what information he came here for. Adrian began his story. As she knows, he has spent his entire life on the border, so he is unfamiliar with events and peculiarities in the capital. That is why he wants to sign an exclusive contract with their guild. His interlocutor asked what kind of exclusive contract it was. The hero explained that she would need to gather information about the capital's major aristocrats and merchants. She would also need to report any incidents worthy of attention. In return, he would pay her and fully finance the guild's activities. Annabelle reviewed the offer made by the young man. In the end, she said that everything was very good. He was familiar with the situation, so she had no reason to refuse. Adrian was pleased. Everything was going perfectly. Usually, information guilds do not support small houses. But fortunately, Luzin was experiencing financial difficulties. The guild leader asked if information about the 3 most important families in Rosenbaum would be enough to start with. Adrian wondered if she meant 3 and not 2. Annabelle confirmed this. He already knew everything there was to know about the 2 most famous families, the Townsends and the McCarthys. These 2 ducal houses were the pillars of the empire. They had been balancing each other's power for decades. In essence, they are the ones who rule the empire. The young emperor is nothing more than an empty shell. The main character found this statement harsh. The guild leader also mentioned the Marquisate of Carusero. This is the 3rd family. This house is over 400 years old, but no one knows what it does. The Marquis, Chai von Krauser, has been in seclusion for over a decade. Some even say he is 20 years old, while others say he is 50. The strange thing is that both dukes desperately want to win Krauser over to their side. But the Marquis remains neutral. The main character thought to himself that he had never heard of this Marquis in his previous life. It also didn't seem like Reiki knew him. So he won't cause any major incidents in the empire, and won't be tied to the capital's power blocks. But something about the guy still worries him. So he took out a bag of money and asked to find out more about Krauser. This is payment for today. The guild leader was very pleased. With this money, they would finally be able to buy meat. Tatiana asked the lady not to embarrass herself. She had been learning to control herself all this time. After a while, Adrian and the others came out. Reiki reported that the mention of Krauser was clearly necessary to push them into this order. I wonder why the gentleman fell for it. The hero replied that if his duke was interested in him, it would be a good idea for them to find out everything they could. It seemed that he was not familiar with him either. After a while, Count Callisto arrived at the estate. There he was met by the butler. He informed him that a visitor was waiting for him. The hero was surprised. Who could it be? He wasn't expecting anyone. It turned out that a court magician had come to see him. Adrian was embarrassed. He did not want to meet him at all. Because it was the Imperial Archmage, Duke Rambly Ivan. It was no surprise that he had come here, since the young man had used magic in front of him. His Majesty had forgiven him for the attack. But what about the use of magic? He couldn't get away with it like he had with the family. Therefore, he might be exposed. What if the wizard had approached him? He said that the Count must understand why he had come here. Adrian braced himself for the worst, but suddenly his companion stunned him by asking him to take him as his apprentice. The guy was so stunned that he didn't understand if he had heard correctly. Could what he had heard really be true? Did Duke Rambly now want him to be his mentor? The man asked him to call him simply Ivan. The hero objected, saying that they weren't close enough for him to call him by his first name. The wizard was insistent, telling him not to be shy and just do it. He wasn't some insolent upstart who would dare to speak to his mentor as an equal. Adrian thought that he already regarded him as his teacher, even though he hadn't said anything. He pointed out that this was impossible, as he was older than him. Besides, he was the one and only Archmage. How could he teach him? There were rules and manners in society. Ivan shouted that there was no such thing in the world of magic. In the world of magic, it is not age, titles, wealth, or even power that matter, but only skill. The pursuit of higher levels is the true recognition of a wizard, and only the strongest reach the top. That is the law of the magical world, isn't it? That's why Count Callisto simply had to become his mentor. Adrian spoke again. First of all, he asked for clarification that his level of magic was not superior to that of an archmage. His interlocutor thought that this simply could not be true. He had personally seen the young man cast a sixth circle mirage spell, and he had done it with just a few words. The main character was cornered by these words, but he tried to wriggle out of it and said that it was just third-level invisibility magic. Rambly declared that this couldn't be true, that he was talking nonsense. He had clearly heard him say the word mirage. Adrian believed that his interlocutor was mistaken. He was incapable of such a high-level spell. The man asked if he really meant that His Majesty had also misheard. Suddenly, Rocky entered the room. Was he talking about His Majesty? Milord had met with the Emperor, or had he misheard? The young man realized that he had not told Rocky what had happened at the ball. Ivan was indignant that a mere bodyguard dared to interfere in their conversation. Adrian apologized to his companion for his bodyguard's harshness. This guy is not just a bodyguard, but his old and close friend. He understands that this is not proper etiquette, but asks to be allowed to stay. The Archmage agreed, if that was Count Callisto's wish. After a while, Rodriguez received information about what had happened. Reiki listened to everything and reacted with surprising calm. Although it was a misunderstanding, the main character still attacked the Emperor. He expected something to flare up in anger, but it seems he just wanted to know how things were going with His Majesty. However, there is something even more surprising than that. This is what Count Ramble did not recognize about Rakia. He had just said that, in any case, His Majesty had asked him to convey his gratitude. Adrian used a fourth circle illusion on Rakia. Duke Rambly had already reached the fifth circle, and he should have been able to detect at least traces of magic, but he didn't even bat an eyelid. It was unlikely that he had met any other magicians besides him. Rodriguez asked if he understood correctly that the Duke had asked his master for lessons. The wizard confirmed this. After that, Rocky fell silent and thought for a moment. Then he stunned those present by saying that he thought it was an excellent offer. The Count was an outstanding wizard to His Majesty, a fact that was already well known. Ivan said that he was right, that he was indeed a smart guy. Rocky continued, saying that helping the Emperor's Archmage meant helping the Emperor himself. If His Majesty appreciated this contribution, who knows, perhaps great opportunities would open up for him. And that would be useful for the development of magic, of course. Adrian realized that this man was simply using him to get closer to the Emperor. He didn't like this situation at all. But he agreed and told Ivan that he would mentor him. Of course, he would not be acting solely as an official advisor. He asked that his identity not be disclosed. His interlocutor was overjoyed and agreed to everything. In addition, Adrian asked that he not be addressed with respectful titles. They say that Duke Ivan Rambly is the only magician in the Empire to have reached the fifth circle. He looks young, but he is well over 40. It would not be easy to hide one's identity from such a person for a lifetime. But with such influence and abilities, maybe it really is worth taking a chance, as Rocky said. Leaving the room, they met Regina. The girl greeted Duke Ivan, and he, seeing something, remembered what he had to do. So he took the message from his pocket and handed it to the girl. The Emperor had personally asked him to give her this letter. Adrian and Regina were surprised. Then Rambly explained that this was actually why he had come, but he had been distracted. The hero was indignant. He had completely forgotten what was going on. Confused, Regina asked what she should do. Perhaps he would read it first. How could the Emperor send something to her? Adrian asked her to calm down, as the letter was written specifically for her. Even family members are not allowed to open other people's letters. She must read it and respond on her own. The girl was embarrassed by this. Upon returning to the palace, Ivan reported that he had dismissed Count Callisto as his mentor. The Emperor was not particularly surprised by what had happened, but he asked about the letter that Count Callisto had sent. The wizard said that he had just brought the reply to that letter. The Emperor wondered why his wizard had insisted so strongly that he deliver it. It seemed that his real target was Count Callisto. In the end, he opened the message he had received from his clothes and read its contents. Regina had also read the letter earlier. In it, the Emperor addressed her as Dear Lady Kalisto. He had not had time to say goodbye to her properly at the reception, so he hoped that everything had been resolved. On that day, news of her presence there brought him to Haysbert's reception. Upon learning that a bank for commoners was opening in the capital, he became interested in who had opened it and what motivated them. Therefore, he focused his attention on the bank's owner, Count Callisto. He did not even suspect that the lady possessed such a penetrating mind and a pure heart. Their short conversation was very light and pleasant, in his opinion. Therefore, he hoped that, if she did not mind, of course, they could continue their friendly correspondence. The girl was very embarrassed by what she had read. She was flustered and did not know what to do. In the end, Regina left the room and asked if she could write a reply right away. Ivan replied that she could, but that there was no rush. In the meantime, they would talk with the master, Count Callisto. Regina thanked him for that. After that, she returned to the room and began to gather her thoughts. The first thing she wrote in her letter was an expression of respect for His Majesty. Then she once again asked for forgiveness for her audacity and reckless words at the previous reception. She also apologized for her brother's carelessness. Despite all the turmoil in her mind, one moment remained firmly etched in her memory. It was a light breeze carrying the faint scent of lavender. If the Emperor allowed her to continue their correspondence, she would remember that scent again and again. It would be a true honor and joy for her. I wonder if she could hope for a reply. Perhaps His Majesty would share his future with a foreign princess, and perhaps he was already destined to live the unhappy life of a puppet. But simple communication will be enough for both of them. So he wrote a letter to the girl and happily gave it to her. Then Adriana felt that something unusual was in the air. After the Duke of Rambley's visit, Regina and the Emperor began to correspond every day. Although the main character had never fallen in love in his past life, he immediately realized that something was happening between them. Should he leave everything as it is? What was His Majesty's life like in the past? It seems as if there was nothing memorable. At that time, the empire was ruled by two great ducal families, the Townsends and the McCarthys, and the Emperor simply married a foreign princess at the right moment, chosen by his elders. That was his entire destiny. Adrian thought that at that moment, he had merely set the wheels of change in motion. The rest was up to them, the choices they would make themselves. The Bank of Kalisto quickly became the most talked about topic in the capital. Opening accounts became a trend, especially among the common people. Soon, every second person had a new account. Claude informed the Count that they would easily reach their customer target again this month. In light of this, they would end the lottery promotion at the end of the month. In terms of the number of accounts, they had almost caught up with the main office of the Sylvan Bank. Recently, people had even started coming from the nearest villages. However, verifying their assets was proving difficult. The main character, Balachka, was pleased that demand was starting to grow outside the capital. Now he thinks it's time to expand. His subordinates explain that this will be a bit problematic. He apologizes for saying that. It was too bold of him. Adrian replies that it's okay. If he has any thoughts on the matter, he should feel free to speak up. Claude then explained that most of their clients are ordinary people. Therefore, the amount of deposits is quite small compared to their number. As long as the balance between deposits and loans is maintained, there is no problem. However, if they open new branches and expand lending, there is a possibility that cash reserves will dry up. Adrian sat there smiling silently. Claude was surprised. He didn't understand why Adrian was smiling. At that moment, the hero said that he had assessed the situation correctly. That is why he thinks they should launch the project he had proposed earlier. His interlocutor was confused, saying that the project was very raw, that it was just a draft. It had been rejected because of a lot of critical errors. The Count said that everything was fine. He, in turn, personally intends to work on refining it. Several ships arrived at the port. As expected, a special person counted the number of boxes. They were Hoffman's merchants. The man said that there were exactly 50 boxes of paint and that they would cost 30 gold coins. The man said he would pay the amount without any problems and handed over a piece of paper. The merchant was surprised that the paper looked like some kind of bill. His companions were surprised that he was not yet aware of this check issued by the Kalisto Bank. He should take it to the bank and get his 30 gold coins. The merchant thought that this was the same bank that accepted commoners. Did he really mean that this piece of paper was worth 30 gold coins? If so, why had they come up with such a thing? The buyer explained that, to be more precise, it was his 30 gold coins that had been deposited in the bank in advance. After all, it was quite heavy to carry gold around with you. It was difficult to hold so many coins even with 2 hands. Capets noticed that this was true. But how could he trust a piece of paper? He wanted to be paid in coins, as in the old days. His interlocutor asked him to accept it, as he no longer carried cash with him. Why not go to the bank together, where he could see for himself how convenient this method was? In the end, they arrived there, and the cashier said that the serial number and signature had been verified. This meant they would receive their 30 gold coins. The buyer noted that everything was indeed fair. The merchant remained confused. Was this really possible? Gold coins are heavy and take up a lot of space. Transporting large sums requires considerable effort. Some even spend huge sums of money on mercenaries to ensure the safety of their cargo. Because of this, no one is immune to losses. But with this check, any amount, no matter how large, can fit in your pocket. As a man who has managed trade in India for many years, he understands this from his own experience. After all, the checks of this bank, Kalisto, will soon conquer the empire. After a while, his subordinates reported to Baron Sylvan that it had been confirmed that the Hoffman Guild had started working with the Kalisto Bank. The man was outraged. How dare they? These worthless upstarts, if it weren't for him, they wouldn't even be in the top 10 of the guild. The subordinate continued, saying that these checks were spreading quickly among merchants. To cash a check, one had to go straight to the bank, where they were already met with offers. As soon as the large guilds began to cooperate with them, the nobles began to stir. Whereas before they had shunned Kalisto Bank. The Baron cursed that damn Kalisto. It was just a lousy bank that all sorts of commoners went to when they needed money urgently. And just because of one piece of paper, it became very popular. The man held that very piece of paper in his hands and examined it carefully. It had the bank's seal, a serial number, a signature, and an amount. Nothing special, really. The silk paper was strong and wouldn't get wet or tear. They could make something like that too. It didn't matter that it was a copy. They could start issuing it at their own bank. The merchants were already used to them. The subordinate was a little confused. That would be unethical. Sylvan was indignant at what he was saying. What ethics? If anything, he was the first to start banking in the empire. Writing numbers on paper is not rocket science. His subordinate had no choice but to agree with his master. The Baron also stated that if they had more money from the checks, they would surely open more branches. And when they started hiring new employees, it would be necessary to send one of his own people there. Let them report all the plans of these degenerates. He wanted to know their every move. Seriously, banking is a real headache. Sometimes there are some unknown punks he has never heard of. And sometimes he has to chase away crazy people like Bowen. Adrian also noticed that Viscount Bowen was rather peculiar. He had a strange reputation for being interesting. Would the girl tell him more about him? He was currently with Annabelle, who was confused for some reason. The hero tried to talk to her. She then said that she would tell him everything. She apologized for being a little lost in thought. She thought that Count Callisto was a truly unusual person. He had instructed her to compile a dossier on the entire imperial family. He had gone through hundreds of pages in one go. He had sorted everything himself and arranged it according to importance. I wonder if he's really 18 or if he's just pretending. Putting her thoughts aside for later, the girl began to tell him about Viscount Bowen. As indicated in the dossier, the Viscount has an unusual hobby. He collects women's clothing, and it's not because he has a penchant for women or loves to dress up. He just likes collecting women's clothing. It is noteworthy that the dresses he personally collects during his travels throughout the empire very quickly become fashionable in high society. There is even a belief that if a person wants to order a new dress, they should take a look at Bowen's wardrobe. Adriana thought that he had such a good eye for fashion that they could even start a business together. His interlocutor said that he had been trying to open a salon for several years. He had even been refused a loan by the Sylvan Bank several times, so the opening never took place. The main character was surprised why they refused him. Annabelle explained that it was because, in the bank's opinion, a salon was not a suitable business for a nobleman. Adriana was really interested in this business, so he asked Poiter to put it in the second pile on the right. While his subordinates were doing this, the girl thought that this was a priority investment category. At that moment, immersed in the world, the main characters realized one thing. Just as commoners cannot rise above their origins, some nobles are constrained by their own social status. Adrian focused on changing a predetermined future. He wanted to give a chance to those talents that might otherwise go unnoticed. After a while, he asked Alman how things were going in the county. The man reported that everything was stable and growth was continuing. Thanks to his insight, more and more people were moving there. This year's harvest promised to be the best in history. Adriano thought this was excellent. It meant that the county had nothing to worry about for now. At that moment, he did not yet know that the change for the better could turn into an undesirable catastrophe. In business circles, Callisto's checks were called a revolution, and they in turn began to spread rapidly. Very soon, Sylvan Bank issued its own checks. Some people even started paying with them on the streets. But many still did not know that Sylvan Bank was now also issuing checks. It turned out that they had actually been in circulation for a long time. Those who paid with them personally intended to use only them. The bank was reliable. It had been in business for a long time, and it had many branches. And there was no need to go to the main office like with Kalisto. Poiter told Adrian that their share of the check market was shrinking faster than they had thought. It looks like it will be difficult for them to compete with Sylvan's reputation, built up over many years. Large trading houses are switching to them en masse. Adrian said that this was quite normal. This is the way things are for any successful business of this kind. The main goal has already been achieved. They haven't expanded their customer base, and yet, the most important thing is that they have technology that no one else has. Over time, their customers will understand the difference. It turned out that there was a client who had requested an appointment today. Adrian saw a gorgeous bouquet right in front of him. It was brought by the man who wanted an audience. He noted that it must be Count Callisto himself. What was strange was that this man gave flowers and stood on one knee. It turns out that Viscount Bowen is a collector of women's clothing. They say he has a keen sense of trends and is always one step ahead. To be honest, the main character was a little scared, thinking that he might have some strange tastes. But when he met him in person, he realized that this man simply loved women's fashion. The Viscount pretentiously declared that, to be honest, when he received the documents from their bank, he was shocked. He was sure that the letter had come from fraudsters. It wasn't even a loan, and he couldn't have imagined such a thing in his wildest dreams. Adrian confirmed this. He would like to offer him the opportunity to open his own salon. Moreover, he would not need to repay the deposit. They would simply like to receive a share of the profits. Bowen burst into tears and said he was deeply moved. He had always been considered a mad pervert. Even saying it out loud was considered frivolous. But Count Callisto believed him. While the Viscount was sensually recounting the story, Poiter decided to put the flowers in a vase. Then Bowen said that there was no need to put water in the vase. His companions did not understand why. It turned out to be quite simple. All the flowers in the bouquet were artificial. After all, the flowers were too beautiful to wither in an instant. So he found a craftsman who could preserve their freshness forever and immediately invited him to his home. Adrian was delighted. It couldn't be true. Were these flowers really not real? But they really look like real flowers. Until you touch them, you can't tell they're artificial. Bowen explained that the process of creating them was very complicated, and one such flower cost about 2 silver coins. After hearing this information, his subordinates even suggested that the main character reconsider the investment. This client clearly had a problem with financial acumen. Who would invest 2 silver coins in fake flowers? However, Adrian, for his part, understood that this was not the case. These exquisite artificial flowers would later win the hearts of the empire's noble ladies. They would become decorations for hats, brooches, and dresses. They cost several gold coins each, and demand outstripped supply. So they would be used as accessories. It is not surprising that in his previous life, this was the reason for Callisto's financial ruin. The main character remembers this very well, and even if the fashion for them passes in a few years, he thinks that adding a fragrance will make them even better. Thus, he informed Viscount Bowen that he thought it would be a real investment, so let the story of his salon begin with this. He received a bouquet of artificial flowers. Regina asked in surprise, "Are they really artificial? They smell even better. They must have been sprayed with perfume." If you look closely, the petals look like the finest silk. It's simply amazing. Rodriguez and Asa were not impressed, as they found the girl boring. Asa was indignant and lost all interest in them. All he cared about was the bank and meeting with informants. Although Adrian had moved to the capital primarily for business reasons, they couldn't even eat together. Suddenly, Asa felt something strange. He even asked Rodriguez if he felt the same way. Literally every evening, a powerful stream of magic emanated from that shed, and the source of this magical energy was, of course, Adrian. He left the building and immediately heard someone addressing him. Asa indignantly asked what he was doing there at night and what he was hiding from them. Rakia was also curious if it was safe. The main character was at a loss. Rodriguez realized that today he would not tell them anything again. Asa was indignant, calling him a traitor. They had agreed to question him together. Suddenly, Adrian asked if they wanted to go in. He was just about to call them. In the end, they all went inside together. Adrian said that he had been working on it in his spare time and had finally finished it today. It was also necessary to strengthen the magical barrier, otherwise everything would leak out. Asa noted that it looked cool. Rakia was curious about what kind of magic it was that could drive someone crazy. The main character explained that it was a warp gate. The guys didn't expect this to be 7th level magic. Even before the magic was lost, almost no one could create them. They were surprised and wondered who he was. Then Adrian revealed that he was the heir to the Golden Dragon Siegfried. Of course, this surprised his companions even more. The two had already guessed that he was no ordinary person, but they never asked unnecessary questions. He could have hidden forever if he had wanted to. But to those who had entrusted him with their fate, he owed at least a share of the truth. It was the least he could do. That's how Adrian got the obsession they know about, although he thought that he still couldn't talk about returning to the past. In the end, Rocky said that it was not surprising that he had hidden it. How could anyone have thought out their identity so carefully? Asa noted that the cave they had been in must have been his lair. The most important thing was that Adrian now felt comfortable moving between the capital and his estates through these gates. Disappearing without explanation wasn't the best idea, so he suggested that they all go together. And in the end, they did it, entering the magical gate. Asa was delighted by the smell. It must have been the real smell of Kalisto. The main character said that this was the first time he had used 7th level magic, so it took a long time to adjust the coordinates. Rodriguez noticed that this was the very storeroom he had forbidden anyone to enter not long ago. So that's what he had been preparing there all this time. Adrian explained that it was simply too unsettling to leave the premises for long. Rakia found this convenient. You can only move between this shed and the room, probably. The master confirmed that the warp gates only work with fixed points. A month later, he returned to the Kalisto estate. He opened the window and couldn't understand what all the noise was about outside. But there, Adrian saw a real hell.